Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jonathan Tepper, co-author of The Myth of Capitalism, Monopolies, and the Death of Competition. Also on the program, a deal supposedly struck, I feel like I said this yesterday, to keep the government open as labor drops the hammer. Meanwhile, hundreds die in a Brazil dam disaster under a libertarian's dream regulatory scheme. State of Utah flips off its voters and shrinks its Medicaid expansion. Ilhan Omar apologizes for what Tom Friedman gets paid to say. Kamala Harris, new revelations of her prosecutorial past means she has some explaining to do. Meanwhile, speaking of explaining to do, Amy Klobuchar facing an avalanche of criticism from ex-staffers. Who knew? Apparently, a lot of people. And lastly, Rick Scott, who took the fifth dozens of times in a Medicaid fraud case, says, trust me, I don't need a blind trust. All this,
I plead the fifth.
And more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Happy birthday to my dad.
Happy birthday, Mr.
It
Seder.
just occurred to me as I was reading off the date that today is my dad's birthday. Now, he's out of town. I already got him a present, so I'm covered. But just going to make myself a note.
What's your dad? Is he in Vegas?
Email
Is he partying?
dad. I don't know. He's on the road somewhere.
Never you mind.
None of your business. None of my business. I understand. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone's here today. We have Matt, Jamie, Brendan, Michael, all in studio so that you don't get shocked if you hear someone's voice. Folks, want to remind you, Candace Owens, the number 2, is she number 2 at Turning Points? Turning Points USA has had a very difficult go of things as of late. I think they were they were exposed as to having very little savvy when it came to setting up a Twitter account in the UK. They didn't wait for verification, and then some rapscallions created other TP UK accounts, and no one could tell which ones the real ones were. They were so close to parody. The legit TP UK that people had trouble telling them apart. And then somebody goes and digs around on the success of their Facebook advertising campaigns, and it turns out an organization dedicated to trying to propagandize to college students. Their biggest, all of their campaigns seem to resonate most with men over the ages of 65. Now, I don't want to go too far. I don't want to lean too far out ahead of my skis because it's possible a lot of those people will return to college, folks. I don't know. And then Candace Owens over in Great Britain, again promoting the expansion of TPUK, basically said, Hitler, his nationalism at home was okay. It was that he tried to, it was his sort of, I don't think she used the word imperialism, but it was just that he tried to...
Globalism. The only bad stuff that Hitler did was the stuff that she's mad at Jews for doing.
Right.
Basically.
Globamoji.
The globalism was the bad stuff. The stuff at home, she was just trying to make Germany better.
Make Germany great.
Right. I mean, make Germany great again. Make it just more German, if you will.
More national.
Right. And so then she got into hot water, and apparently she had to go on a tour where she pretended she was misunderstood. And unfortunately, they let her describe what she said, and it didn't really work out any better. Here she is on Lou Dobbs, and... who better to speak to walk through this minefield than Lou Dobbs?
Great to have you here. Let's start.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to see you. I want to start by addressing some of the remarks of yours from late last year that were dredged up by a leftist advocacy group.
Pause it. Late last year, as if okay, that's a month and a half ago. And they weren't dredged up. They did a public, they were on stage. This is not like they dredged it up from a conversation you were having
like
at
the Titanic.
At a pub. Yeah, exactly. They had to really go way down to the depths, almost like to the website that you run, and actually pull it off the website.
To attack you, claiming you seem to defend Hitler while explaining the term nationalism. Your thoughts? I know you tried to straighten this thing out last Friday.
Yeah. Well, look, you and I both know what this is, obviously. The left has me as a major target because I have been effective at delivering conservative principles to the Black American community. Plain and simple. They am the #1 target because I am leading a revolution called Blexit, which is going to encourage Black Americans to finally look at the real history, the very racist history.
Not for nothing, but if you're leading a revolution and you have to explain what the name of it is, it may not be quite the revolution you think it is.
It is called the struggle for Indian independence. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone. It's the Salt March. It'll make our head spin.
There you go.
Finally look at the real history, the very racist history of the Democrat Party, which has not served us. So first they ignored me, okay, then they laughed at me, and now they are fighting me at every turn
they're going to
with
try
the most ridiculous thing. The most ridiculous.
I'm sorry, pause it again. I'm sorry. To be honest, and I hope I'm not telling any secrets of the left and the Democrat folks, but we're still on the laughing stage.
Yes,
we're still at the laugh.
Don't rush our process.
Right, exactly. Give us a little bit of time here.
The most ridiculous. The idea
test
that
of your
I, a person who
effectiveness
flew
is
30
this,
hours.
Candace, let's get to the point here.
Did she just say that? Wait, go backwards, please. Is she saying? I thought she was going to go like the idea, me, a person of color, saying that Hitler was great. No, she's talking about, I flew 30 hours.
Laughed at me, and now they are fighting me at every turn.
They're going to
with
try
the most ridiculous thing. The most ridiculous. The idea
test
that
of your
I, a person who
effectiveness
flew
is
30
this,
hours.
Candace, let's get to the point here. This business with Hitler and nationalism. You are a #1 target, or among the #1 targets for Media Matters, for all the left-wing advocacy groups. They're going to try to kill you, figuratively speaking.
I flew 30 hours!
No doubt. You straighten out this thing with Hitler and nationalism, real quick, if you would.
The discussion was about nationalism and whether it's okay for conservatives to say that they are nationalists. And what I said is that the word nationalism is wrongly attributed to Hitler because he was not a nationalist. He was not focused on trying to bring the Germans to a better state because he was actively killing German Jews. He was also trying to...
The last time we talked about this, it was like she really needs a remedial history course. But she really needs a remedial history course. the idea for Hitler was that he was trying to make Germany great again, to borrow a phrase.
Oh, he did say that.
I flew
to borrow a phrase from him, I guess.
I flew 30 hours, and boy, do I have positive feelings towards Hitler.
And it's just that one of the ways that he went about it, one of the not the only one. I mean, he wanted to increase the industrialization, and there was a lot of
Some
other
imperialism.
Yeah, one of the ways was
Trains.
to get rid of those who were diluting the German culture, according to him. They were almost, if you would call it, like aliens, for as far as he was concerned, illicit aliens. Almost.
And it didn't start out as we're going to kill the Jews. It was like, oh, we're just going to put them back where they belong elsewhere.
They had a
And
lot
if you
of
notice,
different.
the Jews were not. The Jews will not dialogue with us about
They
this.
were deporting them. They just couldn't find places to go. But you see, they had multiple solutions, and then the one where they started to kill the Jews was the last or the final solution, if you will. Let's hear. Maybe she salvages this.
Nationalism is wrongly attributed to Hitler because he was not a nationalist. He was not focused on trying to bring the Germans to a better state because he was actively killing German Jews. He was also trying to expand, and he was an imperialist.
Exactly.
He was a homicidal maniac, and we need to stop associating nationalism with
two of the evilest figures in history.
Evil.
So
Absolutely,
have you learned
they are
a lesson
disgusting.
here? Let me just curious,
Yes,
because
I've learned.
in this business, it's a very simple thing, the news business. Anybody who brings up Hitler loses every single time.
I've learned that.
Okay, so when
That
you
is
look for a
correct.
metaphor, take it from the old guy. Find another metaphor. Find another symbol. Another symbol.
I will totally take that advice. I've learned my lesson.
Well, it's and you are, because you are such a target, you have to be keenly aware at all times.
Extra careful.
And you are. And
Just
enough said. Let's turn to Virginia.
And Lou Dobbs, I want to hear that part. And then Lou Dobbs is like, trust me, I've been trying to explain that Hitler wasn't that bad for a long time, young lady. And it's a tough road to hoe. You got to pick your battles. Media Matters can come after you every day.
What's shocking about that was Lou Dobbs basically tees up what are your thoughts about that? In other words, I know your people have told me that you want to explain this. You probably have something prepared. So I'm not even going to ask you a question other than time for you to speak and justify your words. And she still steps in it again. Almost in the identical
I would like
way.
to clarify exactly what I was saying, which was that Hitler, great domestic policy, overly aggressive foreign policy. Thank you.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah, that was a little rough. Stalin was also bad, but let me just be clear here. It's tough. You talk about how good Hitler was off the record.
I'd like to see inside the chat at TPUSA right now. They're probably like, oh, so we're saying the Holocaust did happen. Okay.
Right, exactly.
The chat is, guys, can you please stop saying the Holocaust didn't happen so much? We've already seen that chat. Don't be so friggin' overtly.
Oh, that's right. There was actually
we've literally seen that chat.
Exchanges from TPUSA in like their Florida chapter, like, hey, if we're going to use this Slack channel, stop saying like, the Jews are bad for no reason.
Yeah, only when they deserve it.
Yeah, guys, we're trying to be a serious organization, and you're going to need to say that the Jews are global bloodsuckers when it's part of a policy argument.
Just avoid saying the N-word, and don't reference Richard Spencer too much, and don't Jew hate just cause all the time.
Just cause.
You got to have a reason, folks.
Where's the lie?
Fast to lie. Fast to lie.
It's just trying to make Germany great again.
Thanks for having me on, Lou. Really innovative in domestic policy, but actually kind of Jewy in foreign policy. Thank you. I'll see you next week on the A Block.
Folks, a lot of times we get emails. I don't want to say every email, but I would say 70% of emails that we get, regardless of what their content are, end with somebody saying, hey, guys, thanks for keeping me sane for X number of years or months or whatever it is. There's another way in which you can sort of maintain some sanity in this era, basically by slowing down and being mindful. Imagine how many goals and how much calmer you would be if you could do that. Well, that's why we're excited to partner with Calm, the #1 app to help you meditate, sleep, and relax. Practices like meditation and prioritizing sleep can leave you feeling more rested, so you have the energy to go out and achieve your goals. If you head to calm.com/majority, I should say, you get 25% off a Calm Premium subscription, which includes hundreds of hours of programs like guided meditations on issues like anxiety, stress, and focus, including a brand new meditation each day called the Daily Calm. There are sleep stories, which are like bedtime stories for adults. They're designed to help you relax before you doze off. These are actually pretty great. And because I grew up listening to talk radio, and that's the way I would go to sleep. But when you were a kid, listening in Worcester, talk radio was a little bit more benign than it is now.
Can we put on Bob Grant so I can get lulled to sleep, please?
No, but this is nice. I like the idea of...
I'm very excited for you to try all of these applications,
now,
Sam. Trust me.
The downside is they also have... there's that Lavender Fields of France with Stephen Fry. No, I can't go there. Because I wake up.
Oh no, it's just psychosomatically.
Stephen Fry's so good that he makes Sam have an allergic reaction just to the narration.
Exactly. But
Stephen Fry is that
Exploring New Zealand with Jerome Flynn from Game of Thrones is pretty cool. For a limited time, Majority Report listeners get 25% off a Calm Premium subscription at calm.com/majority. That's Calm, CALM.com/majority. Get unlimited access to all of Calm's content today at calm.com/majority. Give yourself the gift of Calm and start 2019 off right. This is pretty amazing, and I have a confession to make about this. I'm kind of addicted to this. And I don't think that's the way that it was meant to be used. But do you remember 1989, the year the World Wide Web was invented? We've come a long way since then. So why does it feel like the software you use every day at work is stuck in the past? Take a leap into the future by finding the right software for your business on Capterra.com, the leading free online resource to help you find the best software solution for your business. With over 700,000 reviews of products from real software users, Capterra has everything you need to make an informed decision. Search more than 700 specific categories of software, from project management to email marketing. No matter what your business needs, Capterra makes it easy to discover the right solution fast. All right, so when they came to me and asked if I would take Capterra as a to do a live read, because I won't do it for just, for companies that I don't, I have a problem with or I check out and I just think they aren't a good fit. So if you head over to Capterra.com and go to the categories, there's literally, 700 specific categories of software. And I have been going through these different categories, and it's a review site on the specific software, but I'm just amazed at the different businesses that you can look at. Like, there's a gamification software. And so I go in and I just start looking, and I think I'm starting to have like some type of, I don't think there's a midlife crisis, but I'm contemplating like, a coaching software. Maybe I could become an online coach or something. Like, I started looking for new jobs I could have. Festival management software. I could do a festival. And there's literally, for festival management software, I'm just looking at it right now, there's literally like 25 different softwares that are developed, I guess, if you have a festival management company. There's a data loss prevention software, delivery management software, government software, GPS tracking software, gradebook software, On and on. I'm just going HVAC software. I have no idea what you would do with software, but all these, no matter what kind of company you have, they apparently have software for it, and this aggregates all the different types of software for you. So you can visit Capterra.com/majority. If you don't have a business, you can also spend like hours on it, like I have, just sort of fantasizing, like
all of the possibilities.
I mean, I could go right now. I could just become a nutrition analysis.
Billy McFarland, yes.
Analysis because
a
I got the
nutrition
software.
guy. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, maybe that's not so much for me, but oil and gas software, if I wanted to get into that biz.
I could see that, actually.
Visit Capterra.com/majority for free today to find the right tools to make 2019 the year for your business. That's Capterra.com/majority. Capterra, CAPTERRA.com/majority. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, Jonathan Tepper on the myth of capitalism, monopolies, and the death of competition. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program the founder of Variant Perception, the author with Denise Hearn of The Myth of Capitalism, Monopolies, and the Death of Competition. Jonathan Tepper, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let's the story of how you decided to write this book is a funny one, and I think, to a certain extent, what's interesting to me, not just about what you've assembled here in the context of your book, and we've talked about antitrust issues quite a bit on this program, but is that I think probably from a political standpoint, you're not necessarily coming from the same place as a lot of you're not necessarily coming from the same places. I think a lot of the guests that we have on this program, generally speaking. But tell us how you came to writing this book.
Certainly. So I didn't really I'm not an expert in antitrust or monopolies by way of background. I didn't really think I was going to end up writing a book about this. I hope I've become somewhat of an expert in the process of reading thousands of academic papers and hundreds of books. But the funny thing is, I actually provide research to hedge funds and to very wealthy families, what are known as family offices that invest their money. And, what I try to do with my day job is, try to tell them, is the stock market going to go up or not? Will government bond yields go up or down? That's sort of what I do for a living. The way I came to this book was because we build leading economic indicators. So, for example, is the U.S. going to go into a recession? Is the kind of question that our indicator should answer. Is inflation going to go up or down? And one of the key questions or key indicators that we have is our leading indicator for U.S. wages. And so this indicator has worked over many years. And what it does is it tells you whether workers will be getting a raise or not. And the reason that this matters is because when workers are getting big raises, typically company return on equity and company operating margins go down. And that's just what happens late in the economic cycle generally. And it affects corporate profits and return on equity. And so I thought, our leading indicator was important because it matters a lot for investors, but it just stopped working. And our indicator was turning up. It was going up a lot, and wages weren't going up. And so I hate being wrong. And, I was telling clients, just wait, the wages are going to go up. And as all your listeners know, wages in the U.S. have been fairly pathetic for over a decade. And so, it just troubled me. I wanted to get to the bottom of it and figure out why it was wrong. And at the same time, as I was sort of playing around with this question and trying to find the answers, Piketty's book came out, and Thomas Piketty basically wrote a book describing the rise in inequality, and he said that he had found a fatal flaw in capitalism, and he argued that when growth was low, that returns on capital would be very high, and workers' returns to labor would be very low, and this would drive inequality even higher. And I'm an investment analyst. I look at companies. I've built hundreds of financial models, and his ideas just made no sense at all to me. One, growth is not very good for returns on capital, but secondly, more importantly, if you have a business that has very high returns on capital, I'm going to be attracted to those returns. I'm going to want some of your money, and I'm going to go in and compete with you. And so I thought, competition is what brings down returns on capital. And so I thought the place I need to go look is probably on the competition side. If returns on capital are not going down, then there's probably not enough competition. And so I ended up doing a lot of research, and the best paper I read was by Gustavo Grullon and some of his colleagues, and it's called Are U.S. Industries Becoming More Concentrated? And what he found was that in most industries, what we've seen is less and less competition, fewer and fewer players. And so what you end up with is not necessarily outright monopolies, and there are some, but actually sort of oligopolies or duopolies. And these are essentially like industries that are dominated by 2 or 3 or 4 companies, and there's very, very little competition. And so that, I think, is at the root of a lot of the problems that we see in terms of low wages, low economic dynamism, and I would put myself sort of right of center. I love free markets. I love capitalism. I think it's the most wonderful thing ever. And I think that the real problem here is that we don't actually have enough competition. And so Joseph Stiglitz described this as ersatz capitalism. So it sort of looks like capitalism, but it's not. And right now what you have in the United States is, in theory, this is like the greatest free market in the world. And actually there's very little free markets and very little competition.
Okay, and so let's dig into this, and it's and so we're looking at this lack of competition that is, I guess I don't know if it's an explicitly antitrust a monopoly, but like you say, oligopoly, and you write that there's certainly major players out there who understand this dynamic and have been profiting off it. And you talk about Warren Buffett and Silicon Valley. Let's talk about, in particular, Silicon Valley, because that is one of the that seems to be one of the more, I think, pronounced, or at least maybe we're a little bit myopic here because obviously we're online to a large extent, but the tech world seems to be one where we have, which is highly problematic in that regard.
Yes, I think that the tech giants, these tech monopolies, are really attracting an enormous amount of attention right now because everyone interacts with Facebook, everyone interacts with Google, and so these are drawing a lot of attention. And in a way, they're the lightning rod. But in the book, we go industry by industry, and in fact, there's an enormous number of industries, particularly the U.S. healthcare sector, which is one of the most messed up and broken sectors of the economy, that is eating up essentially about 1/5 of GDP. Unlike almost any other developed country in the world, it has almost no competition. And so But I'm thrilled though that people are focusing on the tech giants, and this is bringing about this antitrust.
Let's get we'll get
debate.
to hospitals. I want to get to hospitals. I want to get to cable and airlines, but let's start with
sure.
with some of those big tech giants, because I think people don't understand. I mean, there's been a lot of debate, around things like Google and Facebook. Should we nationalize them? I mean, how do we deal? We hear it in the context of certain people being deplatformed or whatnot, but there's a lot of sort of economic. There's different silos, it seems to me, that are problematic with these things. But from a purely economic standpoint, Google and Facebook are highly problematic in terms of entrepreneurship, and explain that.
Yes, one of the principal problems that we've seen now, essentially with Google and Facebook, is that the internet itself was meant to be open and free, slightly anarchic. In the early days, you had DARPA. It was meant to withstand a nuclear bomb. The idea was that you would have a blog, I would have a web page and a blog. We might link to each other, and then we might link to someone else, and you'd have this very rich set of connections, and it was very decentralized. Unfortunately, what's happened is that Google and Facebook essentially now mediate over half of all the internet traffic, and so that really passed 50% in 2014. And Tim Berners-Lee created essentially, the World Wide Web through his standards, and he's a legend, in terms of his involvement with the internet. And he thinks that the internet itself is dying. He said that in various articles. And unfortunately, we've gone from sort of a very free and open, competitive internet essentially to one that's highly centralized for the benefit of a few players. And people often say, well, Google is just so much better at what it does, or Facebook's just incredible at what it does. How can you complain? And the products are free. And the problem is that if you look at the tech giants, the FANGs, so the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, they've done, and including Microsoft, they've done, over 430 acquisitions over the last 10 years. None of these have been challenged by regulators. And so what's ended up happening is that Google has been able to buy DoubleClick. DoubleClick did display ads. Google did search ads. Facebook was able to buy WhatsApp, was able to buy Instagram. So essentially, the advertising duopoly, where basically Google and Facebook are the only ones capturing any additional ad dollars, this duopoly that exists was one that the regulators themselves gave the green light to. And so, their dominance of the online world was in no way inevitable, and was essentially allowed to happen through very, very bad antitrust regulation, or lack of regulation, rather. And I think that the big problem with these two platforms is that broken markets create broken politics. And so to the extent that they're very powerful, they're able to then further control politics, further control regulators. And it's particularly troubling that under the Obama administration, no company had as many visits to the White House as Google did. So, Google was visiting many times a week to the White House. They were able to place their own former lawyers at the FTC, and Library of Congress, and so, the Patent Office. And so, in the end, the internet ends up reflecting the interests and the needs of Facebook and Google rather than of the consumer. And beyond that, if you look at the sort of collapse in royalties to artists and to creators, and the collapse in newspapers, what we've seen essentially is one of the greatest arbitrages of all time, which is that it takes you time and energy to make this show. It takes writers time and energy to write. And what ends up happening is that basically Google and Facebook can monetize the content without any need essentially to recompense the people who create these. And so I think that it's very unhealthy, if we think that what we need is a lively ecosystem in the wild, whether it's in jungles or in forests or in the natural world, basically we're ending up with a less diverse and a less rich ecosystem online by having essentially two dominant players completely control the economics.
Let's talk about the solutions, but for a moment, I want to take just a slight tangent here because, and just go a little further into, like, for instance, what Facebook has done, for instance, to journalism, right? Where you have, we just had massive layoffs over the past month from Huffington Post, from BuzzFeed, one or two others. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. But I know that what happened was, that a place like BuzzFeed, they basically gave up their website. I mean, it still exists, but in terms of a source of traffic, and they just went all in on Facebook. And Facebook just decided, we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're just not going to pay you in that same way. And it ends up destroying or severely debilitating a major media outlet. What's interesting too, I mean, from your perspective, and this is, I think it's very helpful to see it in the context of economics only, but it's not just from a perspective of the consumer, right? I mean, because what we're talking about is problematic for citizens, because we have these policies that are the lack of journalism doesn't necessarily hurt me as a consumer per se, right? I mean, it hurts me as a citizen, and we're talking about the oversized sort of political strength that a Google or a Facebook has because they've been able to amass such an amazing amount of money and market share in this space.
Absolutely. So, in this past month, we've seen the new book has come out called Zucked by Roger McNamee. It's a great book. I highly recommend your readers read it. And, the book that I've written with my co-writer, The Myth of Capitalism, is very much on the sort of economic side and antitrust. What's very interesting is that sort of McNamee looks very much at the danger to democracy and the danger to the body politic that comes from sort of Facebook and Google, where, you have essentially these are sort of attention magnets. They know almost everything about the people who see them and view them. And they serve up essentially ads and information that's not necessarily true, not necessarily verified or good. And the algorithms that promote content tend to promote the wildest and most sort of engaging content, whether it's true or not. And I think that's not a price problem. That's not an economic problem, but it certainly isn't a tremendous democratic problem. And I think that the other big problem here is that, like, I point out in the book that they do offer their own content, yet they're like platforms. So they have no responsibility what's on their site. They're just a platform. And yet at the same time, Facebook and Google both pay for an enormous amount of actual real content. You have YouTube studios and so on. So they have the best of all worlds, which is that they're not responsible for any of the stuff that goes up on the platform, yet at the same time, they're very happy to pay to create content to engage people. And you and I, for example, if we started to put out content, we would be content creators. We would be responsible for our content. We couldn't just claim to be platforms. So they have it both ways when it comes to that.
And I know that there's an analogy in what we can do to sort of address the problems in the tech world as maybe also, when it comes to hospitals and other industries, cable, airlines, et cetera. But specifically, like because I think there's a lack of imagination of like how you would deal with specifically like a Facebook and a Google if you were to apply a different concept than we've had in this country really since Bork, I guess, in the 80s, to antitrust when looking at these companies. Like from a practical standpoint, what would you do with a Facebook or a Google, broadly speaking, to diminish their monopolistic, I guess, hold on the internet?
So I think that in the last chapter of the book, The Myth of Capitalism, we offer some specific solutions, and those do apply to Facebook and Google, and they apply to all industries. But for example, I mentioned that there were a few acquisitions that should never have gone through. I think the first step, what we have to do is one is prevent further acquisitions that are bad and anti-competitive. And then secondly, undo any previous acquisitions that have been anti-competitive. And I think that if you look at whether it's DoubleClick or AdMob, whether it's Instagram or WhatsApp, these are acquisitions that are blatantly anti-competitive, and that these companies should be broken up. And it would not be the end of the world. Companies spin off units all the time. Standard Oil was broken up. AT&T was broken up. It's no surprise, by the way, that the internet revolution itself happened basically about 10 years after AT&T was broken up. You ended up with competition, you ended up with innovation, and I think that if we did that to the internet giants, the world would be a much better place.
But I mean, would you say, okay, I mean, so to the extent that these companies have now been absorbed by the Borg, though, would you say like, okay, the advertising and the search functions need to be distinct, or the messaging and the posting functions need to be distinct? Or how would there be any broad principles, or would it literally be like, okay, you bought these 100 companies, they all need to be spun off at this point?
Well, I think when you look at, for example, what's happened with Google buying DoubleClick, right? Basically, Google completely dominated the search. They were able to then get a very significant hold in the display market. Or you look at Facebook, essentially, which had Facebook itself, and then was able to buy Instagram, essentially a direct competitor to itself. These are essentially, and then WhatsApp obviously they were then able to tie everyone's phone numbers and personal information together. What's happened is, there's a sort of network effect where the more information they amass about people, the more they're then able to serve to advertisers, and advertisers only want to advertise to whoever has the most data on the actual searchers or users. And so these were, blatantly sort of anti-competitive acquisitions that were done to further entrench themselves. And I would be thrilled if we could break up Google and Facebook. Tim Wu has talked about this. He wrote a great book called The Curse of Bigness, and he goes through sort of some antitrust monopoly history. If you look at Europe and even the U.S., there have been agreements between Google and Facebook and the regulators, and the competition authorities regarding the sharing of data. It's no surprise that Facebook has hired former antitrust people now, and Zuckerberg is talking about merging WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Facebook together, because he obviously wants to preempt any breaking up, where it would be easier to do, and wants to make it much harder. What's very interesting is Google and Facebook have consistently violated the privacy of their users. There are consent decrees with the regulators regarding how personal data should be treated. These consent decrees are generally not being observed, yet regulators have done nothing. And so I do think that there's grounds for going after them on that. But these are platforms that don't like competition, are able to buy their competitors, and then don't really have any enforcement of consent decrees by the regulators.
All right, let's talk about hospitals, because there's a lot of folks out there who think that obviously we're talking a lot about single payer these days in the news, but there's a lot of people who think ultimately you're not going to be able to get the prices down unless you deal with the monopolistic practices of local hospitals. Break that down for us.
So if you look at the rest of the world, you have some countries that have a socialized healthcare system. I currently live in London, and I grew up in Spain. The UK has the National Health Service, and Spain has their National Health Service. Those are essentially government-run healthcare systems. Both work pretty well, and they do so generally with about 10% of GDP. The U.S. is basically almost 19% of GDP, about 18.5%. So we're spending an order of magnitude higher, essentially, on healthcare than a nationalized system. You can also look at countries around the world that have private systems, but where the government makes sure that everyone has coverage. So those are like Belgium, France, and Switzerland. So it's possible to have a private system and it's possible to have a government-run system. But in both cases, they spend a significant amount less than the U.S. does. The U.S. essentially has the worst of all worlds. The U.S. has essentially one where the government has extensive regulations and does pay a lot, but you also have essentially, you don't have universal coverage, and you have private monopolies and oligopolies that operate at every level and every sector of the U.S. healthcare market. So, for example, 90% of urban hospital markets in the U.S. are what are known as highly concentrated, according to the Department of Justice guidelines, in terms of few players. And it means that when you don't have any choice about where you need to go get your operation done or any medical treatment, the hospital has complete pricing power over you. When it comes to, for example, the price of a bar of chocolate, if someone told you it was like 10 times more expensive, you'd say, you know what, I'm just not going to eat chocolate. I'll have something else. And economists call that essentially elasticity of demand. When it comes to hospital services, when you need medical care, you will pay through the nose because you need it. And so demand is completely inelastic, and they know that. And so hospital prices have just kept on rising and rising, and we've seen more and more mergers. And unfortunately, Obamacare encouraged more mergers. And so even if you went to essentially a Medicare for all, but you didn't deal with the underlying problem of monopolies and oligopolies, whether it's in pharma, whether it's in group purchasing organizations for hospitals themselves, the insurance markets in the U.S. are extremely concentrated. All of these corporate entities, would still be able to gouge the government if the government wasn't able to negotiate them down, and if the competition was not increased.
Now, do you think that in that context, so what's the solution there? Because can you break up a hospital? I mean, isn't the only solution there to have a player who is big enough to say, we have all the buyers and you may be concentrated in terms of sellers, but we have all the buyers. So, you're going to have to deal with us. We have the same ability to walk away from you as you do to us. Or is there another way?
So what you're talking about is the term is monopsony. So a monopoly is where there's one seller, right? So for example, back in the day, Standard Oil was the one company that would sell you oil, and they were the monopolist. A monopsony is where there's one buyer. So for example, in a coal town, the coal company is the only buyer for labor, right? And so that's referred to as the monopsony, the only buyer. Amazon, as it turns out right now, is the only buyer for books. And so they're a monopsony on the book front. And the government could be a monopsony for medical care, meaning the government's like, you know what, we're the only ones who are going to be buying medical care here, and we'll tell you what the prices are going to be. That is essentially what happens in the UK under a nationalized healthcare system. It's what happens in Spain, and that is one option. I don't know if politically Americans are there yet, right. But you could have a perfectly workable private market that works very well. The problem is that there's very little competition. Believe it or not, you can't sell insurance across state lines, right? You can sell pencils across state lines, you can sell Coca-Cola across state lines, but you cannot sell insurance across state lines. So
let me just stop you there. I know that there has been multiple pilot programs where we have been able to sell insurance across state lines, but the insurance companies found that they couldn't determine the risk pools in these other markets, and they decided it's just not worth their while.
Well, the insurance market in the U.S. is governed by the McCarran-Ferguson Act, which essentially exempts insurance from antitrust supervision and allows the states to regulate insurance companies rather than the federal government. So the federal government regulates, for example, financial markets via the SEC, the Federal Reserve, and you have the FDIC for banks. But the states regulate the insurance companies. And so in many states, for example, like Alabama and Hawaii, you have one company which basically has about 65% market share. There's over 20 states where you have the top two players essentially have over 60% market share. there's very, very little competition when it comes to insurance. There's very little competition when it comes to hospitals. There's very little competition when it comes to pharma, due to the way that the patent systems work and the FDA approvals. And so I think that if what you want to do is go the private route, so let's say the Americans don't want a British National Health Service, which is a perfectly fine thing to want, if they want a private market. The way that they can improve, the way Americans could improve the system is to say, okay, let's get a lot more competition in here. Let's make sure that people are duking it out, fighting, trying to provide better, cheaper services, and eliminate, almost all barriers. And the problem is right now, there are just so many barriers in terms of regulation, in terms of inability to sell insurance across state lines, in terms of, allowing hospitals to merge. And many hospital markets, by the way, are governed essentially by what's known as certificates of need, meaning you and I couldn't go start a hospital in a town that only had one hospital, because often the certificate of need would have the hospital board sort of dictate whether there's a need for another hospital or not, and so they could say, no, there isn't. And then the local hospital keeps its monopoly. And so there are just so many barriers in the U.S. to competition. The American healthcare system is not remotely competitive, and that's why prices are high.
And do you I mean, what do you think based upon that knowledge, right? That we have these, we have essentially 50 different sort of regimes that control the insurance and also the number, issuing basically licenses for hospitals. Like, what is there a way to override that from a federal standpoint, or is it? I mean, how do we break up those monopolies? Because I do know that there have been a half a dozen maybe states that have allowed for the selling of across the state lines, but like you say, it's very difficult for the insurance companies to enter into a new market because of how Byzantine the different states are in terms of their laws. You can't mandate. Could you force a spinoff from every local hospital? I mean, how would you go about doing that in that sector in particular, deal with the different monopolies?
So I would, I would prevent almost any new hospital mergers, in highly concentrated towns and cities. That's as a starting point. I would prevent any future mergers in insurance markets or whatever the market is that makes it more highly concentrated. In the book, I talk about there's extensive research showing that once you get below 6 players in an industry or in a geography, you end up with higher prices. So that's as a starting point. We shouldn't be allowing mergers down to 5, 4, 3, 2, or even 1 players, and particularly one hospital system for a town. So that's as a starting point. On the insurance side, I think that if you got rid of McCarran-Ferguson, took it to the national level, and made sure that anyone who was decently capitalized, could start an insurance company, I guarantee you that you would have a lot of people competing to offer better insurance by signing people up. Right?
So you make a federal standards. You basically, in some respects, you expand on the patient protection side of the ACA PPI. You make a federal standard for insurance, and you make a single standard in terms of regulators, regardless of the state.
Exactly. So what you don't want to do is necessarily just say, sell across state lines, but go to Utah or go to Alaska, or whichever state provides you with the most lenient insurance and regulation.
Right.
Have decent regulation at the federal level, and then allow people to sell wherever they want. It should be like pencils or Coca-Cola or gasoline. You just sell it across state lines. But the issue is when you can create these local fiefdoms, you end up with places like Alabama or Hawaii, which have no choice. And so that's on the insurance side. I think if you look at, in the book, we have a chapter on patents, and if you look at how that's been applied in the pharmaceutical industry, it's just a complete disaster where companies have been able to buy generic competitors. They've been able to offer exclusionary payments to make sure that generic companies don't even bring their drugs to market. So the kinds of price gouging that you see in the U.S. pharmaceutical market is absurd, and it could be dealt with via sensible regulation, to outlaw exclusionary payments, to approve generics, to approve the importation of drugs that the FDA has already said are good. I mean, the European regulators are good. The Japanese regulators are good. You could basically create a whitelist, like a whitelist effectively of countries. So if a European generic company wants to sell into the U.S., let them do it. I mean, there's nothing new. These chemicals are understood. They're tested. If they satisfy European regulations, why should we not allow them here? But essentially preventing the reimportation of drugs keeps them high. And then there's loads of other things like reformulations, which allow the current drug people to further and further extend their patents and gouge people.
All right. Lastly, and I don't mean to press too hard on this, but in terms of on the hospital side, I hear the prescription of basically stop digging, right? Like no more mergers going forward. How do you refill some of that hole? Do you basically just change the regime in which hospitals are allowed to sort of I guess get developed? I mean, I would imagine the capital requirements for starting a new hospital in any context are going to be rather large.
Yeah. So what's fascinating is, when we started this conversation, we were talking about sort of left and right, and I would be sort of right of center. Most of the people who care about monopolies tend to be left of center. I think that this is a bipartisan issue that is not a left or right issue. And what's fascinating is that if you look at, for example, hospital mergers, there's a Republican representative from Indiana, Jim Banks, who has put it forward a bill to ban hospital mergers in highly concentrated markets. And one of the solutions in terms of incentivizing hospitals to break up is to say, you know what, the government's one of the biggest payers in healthcare. The government will pay less if it's a hospital in a highly concentrated market. And, so rather than simply force the breakups, the government could essentially say, you know what, we're just not going to pay you a lot if you want to be that big and, that powerful. And, I think that might work. It's not my law. I haven't put that forward, but that is a law that's being put forward by a Republican member of the House. And so I think that, both sides of the aisle are recognizing that things are completely broken and messed up, and they need to change. And so I certainly hope that we end up with fewer mergers, breakups, spinoffs, and, ultimately sort of deconsolidating some of these markets because, there's no competition.
I would encourage people to read the book. I mean, because you cover cable, you cover airlines, concrete, and beer. But I need to jump to the chapter about buybacks because that is sort of my bailiwick. Just talk about how stock buybacks play into this.
Certainly. So everyone thinks that buybacks are evil. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think they're wrong in the way that they think about buybacks. Buybacks essentially are returning money from the company to its owners, to the shareholders. Now, companies could do that via dividends, so send them a check or a payment, or they could buy back some of their own shares and reduce the number of shares. Dividends tend to get taxed sort of at income tax rates, and then buybacks tend to get taxed at sort of capital gains tax rates. But if companies are sitting on a lot of cash, they're going to return cash to the investors. And if there's not a lot of competition and industries are oligopolies, they're not really going to want to invest. They're not going to want to create more plants or invest in capital equipment. They're not going to want to pay the workers more. They don't have to. There's no competition. And so I think buybacks are a symptom. They're not a cause of the problem. So they merely express the actual cause, which is the lack of competition, the monopolies and oligopolies. And when companies have no competition, they can earn a lot of money, they can get very fat, and that's what leads to the companies then to make so much money that they have it sitting around the balance sheet that they can go out and do a buyback. But banning buybacks essentially is dealing with the cause rather than the actual effect.
Interesting, and that gets back to your where you started with that notion of return on capital not going down properly.
Exactly, and unless you deal with that, the companies are just going to keep on piling cash up on their balance sheet, and you know what? They'll dividend it out, right? Or they'll take themselves private eventually, sort of borrowing debt and just buying the entire shares back. And so what we have to do is to reintroduce competition, make sure these companies are not, sitting on loads and loads of cash, due to lack of competition. And I guarantee you that's going to solve the buyback problem.
It's interesting because, one of the people we've interviewed, and we're going to play an interview with him next week, is Bill Lazonic, who is a professor up at UMass, whose theory about buybacks is that it just simply provides the wrong incentive for a very small group of people. That being, it's not so much that it's returning to the shareholders, it's that it's returning to a specific narrow set of shareholders in the C-suites and on the board of directors who then are, have a misaligned incentive with the corporations that they're overseeing, which is short-term bumps in the stocks actually make them the most amount of money they can make in this instance. What's your perception? What's your sense of that?
So I really like his research. I like his writing. I think that sort of his contributions to the debate have been terrific. So I can only say wonderful things about what he's done. I think he does hit the nail on the head when he talks about essentially this idea of sort of the shareholder supremacy, and this really comes from Milton Friedman. And he was saying that the only goal of the firm is to produce a high return for shareholders, and as if the companies were not part of their community, as if they were not employers, as if they had no broader considerations to the government or to the environment, and the only thing that mattered was making money. And I do think that companies should make money, and I do think that's one of the most important things. But it's not the only thing, and it's not certainly to the exclusion of all other things. And so, if companies think that sort of short-term gains, and to goose the stock price is the only thing going, then what this often leads to actually is perversely sort of worse long-term returns for the shareholder, because they're not investing for the long term. They're not looking after sort of their communities and their customers in the long term. And I think that's very much what we've seen, with many companies, and you see this where companies have borrowed money to buy back shares often, or they've levered themselves up to pay money out to shareholders. Look at GE, for example, right? GE generates loads and loads of money, but they basically were doing so many buybacks that, they levered up their balance sheet, made it incredibly unhealthy, and now they're having to break themselves up. And, this is an example of sort of the short-term buyback obsession versus a sort of long-term orientation.
I bet you the CEO of GE, who authorized those buybacks and the board that signed off on it, I bet they all made a lot of money off of that.
Oh yeah, so Welch and Immelt, for example, are the two CEOs who did that, and they're very well off, very comfortable, and they're not around to deal with the cleanup.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, it's a fascinating book, great research, and I appreciate that in your conclusion you actually offer very specific solutions and remedies, which we tend not to find at the end of a lot of the books that we talk about here. So much appreciated. The book is The Myth of Capitalism. Jonathan Tepper, we will put a link on majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, folks. It's interesting to see the potential, in my mind, of some type of transpartisan agreement on these problematic aspects. Now, I think probably for some of us on the left, it doesn't go quite far enough, certainly even the principles embedded in that, his name now escapes me again, but the Republican proposal to use government purchasing power as a way of incentivizing the breaking up of hospitals. You could also do that even more effectively if you made government purchasing power of these services even that much more powerful. And monopolistic. So, but these are issues that, I think increasingly, and certainly, across the board. I mean, I personally think that breaking up Facebook and Google is a much better solution than to nationalize them, whether to deal with the economic concentration, the political concentration, or these questions of deplatforming. Because, one, I don't want the government to be, selling advertising against videos. Frankly, I don't want the government to be in that business.
Well, do they have to turn a profit, though?
Well, competition would start kicking in.
It's not so much that they have to turn a profit, but we do. I mean, we as a YouTube content provider want that funding from advertising, theoretically, right? And so, but I don't want the government administering it. I don't want the government selling ads on I just don't want them to do that. And the amount of issues that would be involved in terms of First Amendment rights and whatnot, very, very complicated. However, to break up these entities in a bunch of different ways would solve a lot of those issues in terms of like the power of these platforms in within society. I tend to use the word citizen more, I think, than Jonathan Tepper would in this analysis. But there are obviously there's a silo of economic problems and a silo of just sheer democracy problems associated with this. And just citizenship problems, I think.
I mean, okay, people always tell me that socialism is utopian, and, to some degree it is. But the idea of having this bipartisan agreement to regulate the tech industry also seems quite utopian to me.
Well, I mean, we've had it in the past. I mean, it doesn't have to be bipartisan, frankly. We had a more or less bipartisan perspective on antitrust that governed for 70 years from, the beginning of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century till about 1985 or so, when a new perspective on what antitrust was. And we've talked to other people about this in the past, and we're going to have more guests on in the future, but I would recommend people go back and listen to Barry Lynn, and I think we talked to... we had a couple of interviews about this change that Robert Bork promoted before his days of being borked at the Supreme Court hearings, where the notion of antitrust went from keeping and the notion of antitrust mutated from big is bad because it concentrates economic, political power and strips power from the citizenry, to the only principle in determining antitrust should be whether it positively impacts the consumer in terms of price.
Yeah, I think guys like this, like libertarians, is that the phrase that's been trickling up? I think they are genuine allies when it comes to antitrust stuff. And I think like the history of this country has shown like that becomes very popular, especially in moments of concentration like this. I think just when it comes to redistribution is when you lose them, basically.
Wait, what was the name of the book and the author? Brooklyn Law School. And it was, it was a great book, and it escapes me at the moment. We need to tag our podcast better. But we did a couple of these, particularly about a year and a half ago. I think we had 3 or 4 people on. So it's not utopian insofar as it's happened before.
Well, I'm thinking about the current makeup, though, of the Republican Party, especially,
highly
as
unlikely.
well as the Democratic Party, which is the only party that would even try to regulate these entities in any way.
I think there's a fairly significant. I mean, certainly Elizabeth Warren represents a major focal point of power for a renewed and vigorous antitrust movement. Had Hillary Clinton won the presidency, I'm quite sure, and my understanding is that the first or second quarter of 2017 would have been dominated by an argument about this within the Democratic Party at the very least. And so, yes, I think it's unlikely. However, once you have one, the law of Meet the Press is if you have one Democrat who signs on to something, it's bipartisan. If we have one Republican, you really need, a lot more than that to make that argument. But there's certainly...
But anti-monopoly is a strong issue.
Anti-monopoly is a strong issue, and I do think there is rhetoric that can appeal to elements of the center-right in terms of anti-monopoly rhetoric. I mean, I definitely think small business folk, theoretically the bedrock of the Republican Party.
I think the center-right is going away, though, don't you? Like, the Republican Party is Trump now, and everybody is bowing down to him. I think he hates regulations.
The vast majority of the Republican Party. But again, I think there is an argument where, antitrust is, you can certainly frame as anti-establishment.
And what also some of the, definitely that, and also some of this, as you say, and it's true, a element of the center-right, a large amount of the center-right is in the Democratic Party. And I say what I always say in these things, which is, this isn't my particular political project, but I think it's great in the sense that if somebody coming from the position that someone like Jonathan Tepper comes from is writing persuasive cases against monopolies because he feels a concern about the moment we're in because of how we're doing capitalism, that means the whole terrain is shifting in the right direction.
I just like to be the pragmatic and pessimistic one for once. It was fun.
There you go.
Feels good.
All right, we got to take a quick break, head into the fun half. A reminder, this program relies on its supporters for its production. You, our members, those of you who are our members, provide this program with 96.3% of our revenue. We want to bring that up to 96.9%. Maybe we can bust through 97.3%. So we are looking at you. If you listen to this program on a regular basis, if you like it, if you have some extra change in your pocket, and maybe you've given up, if you've given up cigarettes, my gosh.
If you're giving up cigarettes, you're living
flush.
large. You could buy whatever you want.
But
buy a house.
But maybe you found a place that sells your coffee for $2.25 instead of $3.25. Well, then you've just bought yourself a Majority Report membership by far. Even you bought two, if that's the case. Assuming we've done the calculations on this. Assuming 5 coffees a week. You've bought yourself 2 Majority Report memberships. So head over to jointhemajority.report.com. Also, speaking of coffee, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY. Make your coffee at home, and you buy yourself 3 Majority Report memberships practically.
Get your coffee with justice. I like the Just
I'm going to Madison.
Just Coffee is so awesome because I can do jokes during their ads.
I'm going to Madison this weekend.
Really?
Actually,
what are you doing in Madison?
Going to a wedding.
Touring the justcoffee.coop factory. Excuse me, I shouldn't have said that publicly. It all comes from fair trade.
I'm going to.
It turns out Just Coffee's secretly in the new.
If they're open on Saturday, I'm going to go by there.
You should.
That would be a fun
regards,
little.
Please.
Oh yeah, I should do that. Go by and do a little tour. Maybe do like a little Instagram live stream from the Just Coffee thing, Matt. You're not even listening to anything I'm saying.
That was awesome.
I was so excited about it.
I love Matt's balls. Matt, just like, yeah.
Do a live Instagram stream from the Just Coffee store.
The problem
Oh,
is
yeah.
was usually when you're listening, when you're not listening. Yeah, it's powerful stuff. Usually when you're not listening to Sam, you could just go with like yes, exactly. That's ridiculous. and what they did was the Supreme Court said that, but people don't take the court seriously. But you got to get in when he's actually excited about something, which is like 5% of the time. You got to tap
I was
into a
super
different
excited
tenor.
about that.
And that's when you have to be like, oh, yes, we should take on an enormously
folks should
impractical,
check
highly
out-
time-consuming project.
Folks should check out our Instagram account. It is exploding. We have we basically just launched it, and in the past week we've already increased our followers by 50%.
Boom.
There you go. Michael, today is Tuesday. Oh my gosh. Week is flying by.
The week is flying by. Vacation is in the horizon. Tonight, actually, and I guess one more schedule change. Since we're on vacation next week, we're doing two Michael Brooks shows this week. One tonight at our usual time and one on Friday. I would suggest that people check out the Unlocked Illicit History on Sunday. Zach Carter and I on why you shouldn't blame Howard Schultz. You should blame the 1990s. Cultural History of Oligarchy, The Third Way, and the Schultz candidacy. Tonight, the great Mark Blythe joins us. We're talking about the Green New Deal, Brexit, and why Trump can't do his economic populism scam anymore. So he has to double down on xenophobia, and breaking down the Ilhan Omar thing, the debut of Rasta Kamala Harris, the most demented takes in defense of Amy Klobuchar, and a whole bunch more. Patreon.com/TMBS, or on our YouTube channel, which is where we will live stream.
Jamie.
Yeah, so Monday for patrons only, we just dropped, let me put myself on camera. There we go. Andy, AP Andy, our producer, is currently in Mexico because we all go to Mexico a lot as part of our, international Antifa jobs. He came upon one of the world's foremost bookchin scholars, Blair Taylor, at Puerto Vallarta Bear Weekend, which is still like very weird to me how the two really coincide, but apparently a lot of Murray bookchin tramp stamps in the bear community. Who knows? So
There's an eco preserve there for bears.
Yes, exactly. So
I didn't know.
So our baby bear cub, Andy, talks to Blair about radical municipalism, Bookchin's concepts of democracy and citizenship, Blair's Institute for Social Ecology, and the formation of the Symbiosis Network, which is like a anarchist municipalist mutual aid network throughout the continent. He talks about the PKK and Rojava, Bookchin's criticism of fellow Vermonter Bernie Sanders, and
Fuck you, Murray.
what sort of kinky things the old man was getting up to in Vermont.
And Matt.
Yeah, coming up this weekend on Literary Hangover is The Unparalleled Adventures by one Hans Fall, which may be the first science fiction story to have a spaceship go to Mars or the moon. So.
Quesabille Ramen.
Wait, what was the name of that?
Democracy Against Domination.
That was a really good interview. Very smart man.
People should go back and maybe we'll replay that one. That lays out, and we've had others. Barry Lynn from the Open Democracy, Matt Stoller, Lena. Gosh. All right, folks, we're going to head into the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number, and we will see you there. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. The only difference, I will say this, on why it's actually easier to do antitrust stuff than it is to do other major government programs is you do not need any legislation to break up Facebook. You do not need any legislation to break up Google. On day 2, President Kamala Harris, if she was so inclined, could tell her Attorney General's office, we need to reorient antitrust to pre-Reagan era perspective. Go to town.
Well,
and that's it.
Elizabeth Warren said that she admires Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster, for that reason.
Well, Elizabeth Warren would actually do it if
just,
she was president.
Yes,
100%.
Elizabeth Warren would definitely do it. But I'm saying to do a single payer, you need legislation. You need to convince 65 senators at this point and the Supreme Court. And now maybe the Supreme Court might have a different perspective on antitrust as well, although it's hard to argue, and they may take apart like the Chevron doctrine and not allow these agencies to make this assessment. But it is much easier in terms of, I'm not sure it's as effective or that it will necessarily get us to exactly where we want to go, but to implement antitrust, the vision talked about in this book and other books about antitrust, you do not need any legislation. You do not need any legislation to break up Facebook.
You just need to control the executive branch forever.
Well, not just forever, just for those 4 years. They can't put it back together. Ask AT&T. Once it's broken apart, it's broken apart.
Look at Sam.
They can try.
Dipset asked AT&T.
They could certainly drift back together over the years, no?
Well, I just don't think it works that way.
Okay.
I mean, all of a sudden you have separate entities that have their own.
Well, it doesn't work
business.
that way for specific companies, but I mean, you just obviously the broader regulatory environment can change.
Can
but
change,
not for
of course.
specific
Of
companies.
Here's where I zoom out again from this very granular discussion, which is that if it is politically difficult to impossible under our current system to provide a humane life for every human being, maybe the system needs to change.
I mean, I think there's no reason to believe that changing will be any easier than that specific agenda.
Certainly.
But
they're both hard, but one of them points in a more permanent solution kind of direction.
Nothing's permanent.
Whereas the
the Dow
we'll
says,
see.
the Dow say, I'm doing my new app.
You got to turn him down. He keeps popping his.
The Dow says nothing.
We're going to reach the end of
Better
history. For
lower,
real.
because honestly, my
Nothing.
ears are going to bleed at one point.
Ow, my ears.
You got to learn how to
like,
use a microphone.
It's like lavender for my ears.
Well, it's not just mine.
No, no one else is whining.
You don't read the emails.
That's true. I generally don't. Actually, that's a good. That's
Never
good,
read
That's a
the
good FYI.
Well, no, but they say turn Michael down.
I hear turn him
breaks.
up. Turn
it's
him
not,
up.
They're not actual voices. You read them.
That's what I'm hearing from many people.
No, I understand.
Ow.
Keep him down. Thank you.
The Dow say that nothing is permanent. I'm doing my com app.
Not
Okay.
yet.
Here is, as you know, why should we play this one first? Ilhan Omar has issued an apology, is my understanding, for being, although it was a very good, I thought her apology was pretty good, actually, because it didn't deny, it apologized for the use of language. It didn't deny the dynamic that I think we all, that everyone knows, which is that there is an Israeli, a really right-wing Israeli lobby that is largely a, not just, it's not exclusively a function of money, but is highly fueled by money. And that is essentially what Ilhan Omar said. I mean, if there was something that she said that was different from that, I'd be open to it. But let me not make this argument. Let me, for the first time in my 15-year career of professionally talking about politics, defer and to outsource, if you will, this argument to Thomas Friedman.
United case in the Supreme Court that basically said unlimited campaign donations. Now, what that meant is it gave enormous power, I've written all this in my column, to the Israel lobby. Why? Because, Maddie, if you and I are running for Congress from the same district, and I have AIPAC stamp of approval and you don't, I will maybe have to make 3 phone calls, and I can raise my whole, I'm exaggerating, but I don't have to make many phone calls to get all the money I need to run against you. You will have to make 50,000 phone calls. So that pulled the whole spectrum to the right. Then the Israeli government, we had a much more conservative government come in. So what I've seen in America is the whole spectrum on the Israel question has moved to the right, to the point, and this is very disappointing to me, where if you're a young political officer, you're in NEA, our nearest division of the State Department, you dream one day of being ambassador to Oman. Oh, I want to be ambassador to Oman, the car, the whole thing.
I do.
You will not state publicly what is actually official U.S. policy, that Israeli settlements are an obstacle to peace.
All right, so there you have it, folks. Now, Thomas Friedman laid it out in a slightly different way in this interview with Mehdi Hassan, but that's because he wasn't on Twitter. And Ilhan Omar said basically the same thing, that our policy towards Israel in this country is a function of money that comes from AIPAC. How is that different from what Thomas Friedman just said?
Well, here's the difference.
In fact,
she's a Muslim.
Well, that's true.
Also, I haven't heard her explicitly defend killing unarmed protesters in Gaza. So if you want to talk about AIPAC funding, you're going to need to buy a little currency by defending Israel killing civilians.
She didn't even go as far as Friedman did and say that this also intimidates bureaucrats in the U.S. government.
Right.
She just was talking about the first part of what he said, that if I'm running against you, I can make 3 phone calls, maybe 5.
That's right.
And get funded. And so, but the idea of there's the outrage, but good for her. This was her apology. Anti-Semitism is real, and I'm grateful for Jewish allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes. My intention is never to offend my constituents or Jewish Americans as a whole. We have to always be willing to step back and think through criticism, just as I expect people to hear me when others attack me for my identity. This is why I unequivocally apologize. That is a very mature apology. She goes on to say, at the same time, I reaffirm the problematic role of lobbyists in our politics, whether it be AIPAC, the NRA, or the fossil fuel industry. It's gone on too long, and we must be willing to address it. So,
and also just to be clear, I mean, that's that's such a perfect response. But I also think, like, one of the reasons that I have, a long, and I don't know what we're calling it because we have like daily conversations, and we almost need like a style guide about what we call identity politics. But let me just say it for purposes of simplicity. But one of the reasons that I've always had a real problem and a critique of certain weaponizations of identity over policy is going back a very long time, even back to like dinner table conversations on Israel. And the idea that, identity or even serious historical wrongs and contemporary bigotry can overcome the reality of what that state is fundamentally wrong. And, I'm glad, I think she's responding to, the correct impulse that a handful of people had that called out some of what was questionable framing in that tweet. But obviously, a vast majority of what's going on here is profoundly cynical. Trump's just called on her to resign from Congress. And it's time for people to really close ranks and stop the BS and get to the substance. And I mean, I don't know if we're going to play it, but it's like even on the other end of the spectrum, I'm some people saying like, oh, Amy Klobuchar essentially can do this because she's like a woman. She can abuse her staff. And I it's just bizarre. It's really unhealthy. It's ridiculous. And people need to, and she's handled it with a lot of class and a lot of grace. And there's nothing wrong with, like, I think actually there's really great conversations that people can have and just sort of like upping their game. And we should all do that. But the substance shouldn't be lost. And the fact that this is being unbelievably, I mean, if you have Steve Scalise saying, good thing she apologized, is grotesque.
About this notion of Donald Trump saying that her apology isn't good enough, calling for her resignation, Steve Scalise, the guy who literally sold himself as David Duke without the baggage in his early campaigns, to be in any ways criticizing this. Here's Kevin McCarthy. Here's a tweet that Kevin McCarthy put out just days after, what was it, the Pittsburgh, right?
Tree of Life
murders. We cannot allow Soros, Steyer, and Bloomberg to buy this election. Get out and vote Republican November 6th. There you go.
And of course, that
Hashtag MAGA.
And of course, what's amazing to me is like that actually is it. Ilhan Omar, it is ill-considered to tweet. It's all about the Benjamin. But this is objective anti-Semitism.
She was talking about what was influencing policy towards Israel. Here's this. I think maybe someone should educate anyone from Nancy Pelosi to Donald Trump about this. But Israel and being Jewish is not synonymous. And we can make that argument both on the left end of the spectrum with people like myself who do not have payas, but I can also bring in some people who do have payas and make the same argument. But put this aside for a moment, because here's Max Rose, who is, I think about as far to the right that you, not that you can get in the Democratic caucus, but he is in that, that quartile.
It's a right-wing Democrat.
Yes.
Right-leaning Democrat.
And even he was able to sort of like call out the Republican hypocrisy on this.
She's a friend. I take her at her word. I know she wants, we share values. She wants to see a great country. And I look forward to working with her. I do want to, though, point out to all of you that when Kevin McCarthy said that it was Bloomberg, and when it was Soros, and it was Steyer pulling the strings behind the scenes, none of you camped out, right? And their caucus stayed united and had his back, and none of you called him out on that. So I just want you all to acknowledge that there's some hypocrisy going on there too, okay? That caucus can't be chicken shit in the face of anti-Semitism either. In the face of anti-Semitism, we don't acknowledge party. In the face of any hate, any vitriol, we don't acknowledge party, okay? So, seriously, you're not agents of the Republican Party.
Have you spoken with...
Oh, nice. Staten Island.
That was Staten Island. And what he said in the beginning, too. And again,
I like how we traded him for the guy who said, I'm going to throw you off the balcony to a New York One reporter.
There's a nice upgrade there. I hope the rumors I heard about that story are true, which is that Michael Grimm threatened that reporter, who's like a nice young man, throw him off the balcony. And please, all rumors, but the conjecture I've heard is that nice young man had some relatives that were not as nice as he was, that got word to Michael Grimm to not ever do anything like that again. Funny. And I really hope that that's true.
Oh. But there's Max Rose. I mean, making a good point.
Yeah, along those lines, one more thing that people don't realize about the sort of Zionist coalition that exists is that it includes plenty of anti-Semites, right? Like, you can be a Zionist and an anti-Semite. Those two things don't necessarily clash. Like, think about all the religious right-wing Republicans in this Zionist Israel supporting coalition. So, like, yes, just because you are anti-Zionist doesn't mean you're an anti-Semite. And it doesn't mean you're not an anti-Semite.
Well, look at the dog whistles that Benjamin Netanyahu sends out on that. I mean, he's recently said that he said in a speech, I think a year ago, that it wasn't necessarily Hitler's idea to do the Holocaust, that it came from the Grand Mufti. This is like deep internet anti-Arab conspiracy nonsense. And of course, the Grand Mufti wasn't a good guy, but that's an incredible move to try to actually, in some ways, minimize Hitler's role in the frigging Holocaust. And they're buddying up.
Look, I'm sorry. It wasn't my idea.
I mean, seriously. And they're all buddying up and aligning with historically profoundly anti-Semitic European parties. So, I mean, not only are you right in a U.S. context, Jamie, literally in Israel, there's bizarre, borderline anti-Semitic dog whistling coming from the leadership. Because it's a far-right country. It's a far-right white identity politics.
And here's
country.
the thing.
This goes without saying, but I'm sure they will not be defending Bernie Sanders against any kind of anti-Semitic attacks he may face.
I am guessing that that's probably not going to happen.
But I will say this. You know, it is for someone who I have a I have a tremendous amount of ambivalence in terms of Israel that is increased with my age, and with not just a question of my age, but in terms of the direction that Israel has taken. But at the end of the day, I fundamentally want there to be an Israel that exists. And to the extent that there is an existential threat to Israel, it is a function of folks like at AIPAC, the folks who insist on collaborating with them, and the right in Israel present the greatest existential threat to Israel there is, because they're attempting to stop people from essentially expressing their conscience, and that is not going to work forever. And when that dam breaks, when they are no longer able to police in the way that they're attempting to police now, and to silence perfectly valid and long overdue criticism, there's going to be a debt to pay. This is the way all this stuff happens. And it's going to swing hard and quickly. And Israel is going to find itself extremely isolated at one point. And I'm very concerned about what happens then. So to the extent that there's an existential threat to Israel, it is a function of these people, in my estimation.
And this is one more area where Bernie Sanders really is the only option in terms of viable candidates for president. Right now, he's the only one who turned down the invite to speak at AIPAC. And, you know, maybe being Jewish is part of why he's able to do that and play it off well, because, like, what are you going to call Bernie Sanders an anti-Semite? I don't think so.
Yes,
but,
they will.
They absolutely will.
They will.
But
I can tell you, as
I
someone who has
will.
had 15 years of being called the self-hating Jew.
I mean, they can try
but
it.
I'm really
it's not
done.
going to stick that much, is it?
I don't
Not
think so.
as
But in
much
general,
as
we
it
just
would.
can't play that game. I mean, I'm all for like her modifying whatever mistakes she might have made. But the bottom line is, like, anti-Semitism is really clear when you see it mostly, and we're talking about a nation state. And the idea that people in politics can't talk about a nation state is ludicrous and ridiculous in and of itself. And it is absolutely another area where Bernie stands head and shoulders above every other candidate by, ironically, back to the Friedman clip, just publicly stating support for what is actually official U.S. policy.
Right.
And still, until Trump, that might be slightly formally changing.
Yeah. And you know what else is a problem? Islamophobia. And a lot of the attacks on her really reek of that to me.
Of course.
100%.
The so-called progressives are actually regressive.
Calling from a 407 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Christian calling from West Michigan.
Christian from West Michigan. What's on your mind?
Hey, I just wanted to talk a little bit. Well, first off, let me just say that I started listening to your clips in high school on YouTube, and that was a pretty big part of moving me more toward the left. You know, I grew up in a more libertarian, conservative-minded family, so those clips were a big breath of fresh air.
Wow. All right. I appreciate it. Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah, the Democratic Party, you had a caller a couple months ago. It was an older gentleman from Philadelphia, and he was trying to make the case that the Democratic Party needed to strategically stay in the center to try to capture those suburban middle class, upper middle class centrist voters in, like around Philadelphia. And I just think that if we're really going to succeed moving the Democratic Party, not only just moving them to the left, but actually gaining power in the state legislatures, in the governorships, in Congress, and the presidency, I really think it's important that we have to have a more progressive platform and candidates that are actually, committed to progressive ideas and not just, paying lip service like, Kamala Harris will do. And
I think, look, we have shown consistently that you can win with you can win, not all the time, with centrist policies, as long as there's a decent amount of charisma behind it. I think a Kamala Harris, frankly, can win. The problem is that you end up losing across the board because you're not delivering any type of material benefits for people. So, Barack Obama can win 2 elections, but over the course of those 8 years, we lost 1,000 Democratic lawmakers around the country. We lost the Senate. We lost the House. We lost the Supreme Court. Same thing happened in the wake of Bill Clinton, too. So you can win the presidency with a charismatic person who has centrist views, but you can't hold on to power, and the backlash is going to be awful bad. So, that's...
not only that, but it's just, like, I think that in certain strategic instances, like, a centrist candidate might be ideal, in a certain races, but look at what was it, the John Ossoff race in Georgia? I forget that special election that happened the other year. That guy lost. And then I think a more progressive candidate actually won that race.
That's right.
Or at least came more closer than he did.
Won, I think.
And then you have candidates like what was his name, J.D. Scholten in Iowa. Like, these are that guy ran against Steve King, who's held that forever. And he came within 3 points of beating him, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So, I think there's this whole, common sense idea that, we got to, run more to the center since Trump's more extreme. And people are trying to have a sense of normalcy. And I think there's some truth to that. But I really think that people have heard the same third way, centrist policy ideas for the past 20 or 30 years. And it hasn't done anything for them, especially rural voters and working class people. And that's why I think we need to drag older Democrats who are, just more comfortable, quite frankly, in this mindset, kicking and screaming into the future. Because I think that's what it's come to.
Yeah.
Like, if we don't adopt more progressive positions, we're not going to win in 2020, and the Republicans are going to keep capitalizing on our sitting on our butts,
No, I think you're right about that, and I think it's born out of a certain amount of fear that comes out of just still in some ways there is a generation of Democrats who are responding to McGovern's loss, and it is it's just that lesson does not apply and has really been mutated and it's just not appropriate now. It's not a proper assessment of the situation. I appreciate the call, Christian.
And if you look at what the Republicans did in response to, quote unquote, their McGovern losing, it's totally different and more effective, right? Like, they ran Barry Goldwater against LBJ in 1964. He lost really badly. Did they tack to the center after that? No, they dug their heels in. They bided their time. They had a long march through the institutions, and then they got Ronald Reagan, who was not a centrist in any understanding of the word.
Ronald fucking Reagan.
Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Cody from San Antonio. How are you?
Cody from San Antonio. How are you, Cody?
Hey, I'm great today. It's a beautiful day here in San Antonio. It's like 65 and sunny. How's Brooklyn?
I'm going to hang up on you.
Never mind, sorry. Hey, I am kind of curious what you guys' take would be regarding sports leagues, I've been curious about how taxes might come into play because, like, for as much as I've got a lot of places I can go with this, but like for as much as the NBA talks about social issues and all this stuff, they never really do the right thing. You never see LeBron James going out there saying, I deserve a higher tax rate, or, this is how policies like that, money they could take from him, affect, the government. They have I'll give you another point of conversation. They have the Suns, they're about to run out of their lease, I believe. And they had a little old lady. They were trying to get funding from the government there at the city council, and they had a little old lady, 90 years old, saying, Robert Sarver, the owner, doesn't do anything for the city. He's so tight and cheap. He squeaks when he walks, that sort of thing. And, they haven't put together a terrible team. Seattle lost their team over that. I'm just wondering what you guys kind of think. How would the taxes we are interested in to save, the general welfare, how would that also apply to, like, sports billionaires?
I'm not sure what you're asking, to be honest with you, Cody.
Conflating a lot of things there. I mean, you're conflating, like, should taxpayers be paying for billionaires, teams, owners,
Are you talking
stadiums?
about? Is that
no.
what you're talking about? Stadiums? Like,
I guess, yeah.
If
there
was a
lot of power.
If we could pass
in sports teams.
Yes, if we could pass a federal legislation that said it was illicit to provide tax money for sports stadiums, I would be totally in favor of it.
I think he's also getting to the point where
appreciate the call.
Probably the most sympathetic people that are going to be hit by raised taxes are professional athletes and maybe other kinds of celebrities, because it looks like more of a meritocracy or something like that. And the point I'd make is they just need to be quiet about that stuff and not argue against it.
And I think most of them are. Like,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
Funny, like, I would say LeBron, and I like
LeBron's pretty good on social issues relative to previous.
Yeah, I mean, I like LeBron, so I'm gonna go easy. I guess I'll go easy on him. But I would say, I mean, he hasn't said don't raise my taxes, and the extent to which he's been in public conversation, it's to call Trump a bum, and speak out on things like racism. And I guess there's also things that I'm sort of aware of that maybe aren't as sort of publicly facing, where he's pretty good on stuff, is just how I'll put it. And he certainly hasn't said, if you raise my taxes, I won't play for the Lakers anymore because I just won't have the incentive.
Let's play this guy from, he's from West Virginia, right? Yep. This guy Porterfield. Where is the description? Oh, yeah, here it is. Okay, this guy, Eric Porterfield, he is a delegate from West Virginia. He apparently, either on the floor of the House or within a caucus, reportedly was talking about fags, and was, this is the West Virginia House, not a federal lawmaker.
Oh, okay, West Virginia. That's fine.
But it was in a committee hearing. Apparently, we've definitely see this stuff migrate in the Republican Party. My sense is he's a Republican, maybe a wayward Democrat who likes to wear a "Make America Great" hat. But just to give you a sense of, and it's interesting. I'm very curious to see if Dave Rubin is supportive of a guy like this who clearly is cleaning up the SJWs.
I need to read more about him, but
he doesn't like Marxism.
Doesn't like Marxist, and he's trying to make West Virginia have more of a prominent role in the country again.
Yeah, this is an interesting clip because it gives you a sense of what the face of abject bigotry looks like in this country, but also what feckless local reporters look like too. She's so mystified by what this guy is saying and is not pressing on this point, doesn't realize that, I guess we're watching the video, so, but she doesn't realize that it would have been in her both journalistic and a commercial interest to maybe press your subject just a little bit more on something they're saying that you don't seem to be able to compute.
Ask you this.
Yes, ma'am.
You have a adorable daughter and a precious son. Mm-hmm. What would happen if a few years from now, when they're teens, young adults, they came to you and said that they think that they might be gay or lesbian?
Well, I will address my daughter first, as I would take her for a pedicure, take her to get her nails done, and see if she could swim. If it was my son, I would probably take him hunting, I would take him fishing, and I'd see if he could swim.
What do you mean you would see if they could swim?
I just want to make sure they could swim.
What do you mean by that?
That's it. I mean, I'd take them out to do activities.
Okay.
Okay, first off, what the guy is saying is, I would see if they could swim is a euphemism for I would drown them. So he's basically saying he would kill his kids. Also seems to be under the misapprehension that lesbians don't get pedicures or manicures, which I'm quite sure some do. I also am quite sure that gay men hunt and fish. So he's under a couple misapprehensions, but really it seems like the reporter missed the boat when he said, I would kill them.
Yeah, that was, I mean, I don't know.
I
some sort of like lame jokes about cutting room floor, True Detective come to mind, but that's just kind of so sick. I'll just let it stay.
No, it's some Bolsonaro shit, literally.
I mean,
And the smile that he delivers it with, it's like truly bone chilling.
I would like to ask Trump, like, hey, if you had a blind kid, what would you do? Well, I'd take him out, see if he could read without braille, and then see if he could swim. Did you get that?
Go to
That's
the
the
East
difference
River.
that Trump would have been like, did you understand? I said I wanted to see if he would swim.
I'm talking about drowning them, okay?
He doesn't look exactly like Michael Phelps, is what I'm saying.
Unbelievable.
Can we play the True Detective theme at some point with that clip?
Let's play this clip of.
Terrifying,
I like this clip. I know this is sort of petty, but we'll get to that in a second. I want to play the other petty clip we have. Joy Behar.
This is not petty. This is amazing.
So, Joy Behar apparently is they're talking about Amy Klobuchar. I'm not even sure what the point that they were making. I mean, Klobuchar is out there, and we'll talk about this a little bit. But before we get there, it's pretty fun to watch this because, I mean, look, Joy Behar's obviously she's only on television because her dad was a senator and ran for president. And she's on there because of the sheer nepotism involved in that and the celebrity. She simply traded on the celebrity that she got from being now, she's a great person in person, but, you know, it's no, I'm sorry. I'm not thinking of Joy Behar. I'm thinking of her co-host on The View. That is Meghan McCain. And here Joy has basically expresses that I've got news for you. I'm tired of you.
Well, we get high. Well. That's one of the points. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe he's met his match. I mean, she has a reputation for being a pretty tough woman, for having not the best temperament, and he has a reputation for not having the best temperament, and maybe he's met his match.
That's what the country needs. We just need to slide to the bottom and just keep bullying each other. That's what this country needs.
Can I say something now? Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Joy? Do I
Yes, you may now.
I have permission to speak now on Amy Klobuchar. We're all good. Okay, two quick things. Number one, I have friends who were at her now. No, by all means, keep going, Joy.
No, if you're going to have a hissy fit, we can't continue. Let's go to Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Joy Behar is a national hero.
That was so fun because McCain was looking out at the audience for some type of approval, or she was looking at the producers or whatnot. And apparently, off camera, we can't see what Joy Behar is doing, but she's just obviously doing something like this. And then McCain is so used to the idea that there has to be total deference. Right? That, like, it's not enough that I have the microphone. It's that you have to be looking with bated breath as to what I'm about to say. The look on your face, I don't appreciate that. And then Joy said, okay, good. Next topic.
That's totally fine. Let's talk about another person who's more worthwhile than you, Elizabeth Warren. I mean, she's just running a clinic on how we should be treating all useless trust fund babies in this country.
Look, we don't know if she has a trust fund. We do know that she probably, we don't know that it's in trust.
Okay, right. It's true. That's exactly right.
It could
Good
very
point.
well be in her bank account.
That is a good nuance.
But it's not even that as much as she's there for one reason only. She traded off the celebrity. Now,
And she's a token conservative, right?
well, I don't know.
Abby
Isn't that
Huntsman's-
Abby Huntsman's there too for the exact same reason?
Oh, then what is she doing there?
we got
oh,
two
yeah.
tokens to
She's
rub
John
together.
McCain's daughter.
Yes, we're gonna balance this out by having two folks who are benefiting from nepotism. But but getting to the substance of that clip, the idea that like somehow Klobuchar balances out Donald Trump because she has a temperament problem. I don't know if doing mean things to your employees should necessarily disqualify you from the presidency. But it certainly is a valid complaint. Do we have that? Do we have that? That Stephanie
I don't
Rule
think
segment?
we put it
we
on.
didn't pull it.
I don't think
Oh.
they would think. But like, can I just say? I mean, I just want to say couple of quick things about Klobuchar. First of all, her behavior, if it is true, is totally abhorrent and unacceptable, no matter who did it. And anybody saying otherwise is just beyond full of it. The second thing is, I totally agree. The thing that I've been putting forward recently, nobody is perfect. People make mistakes. There should absolutely be room to grow and change in public life. But she not only has not apologized and committed to changing her behavior, she suggested that somehow abusing her staff is part of the same mentality that means I believe in America, which is one of the most demented defenses I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah. And people
and then
are
the
lining
third
up
part
behind her
really,
about that.
and then just really quickly, the third part is this is all in the service of, and again, I'll be really blunt, like if Amy Klobuchar was some great crusading, senator who brought a lot to the table, but it's like, first you abuse your staff, then you don't take accountability and change, and then third, it's all in the service of like, we need tax credits. Like no vision, no purpose, pure
No
careerism.
redeeming qualities. Yeah,
It's
and
disgusting.
her primary selling point that she's pushing, as I understand it, is electability. But like most people who vote are not bosses; they're workers, and if they see you behaving that way towards their workers, they're not going to like you.
Yeah, I'm like I say, I'm not at this point. I'm not weighing in on whether her behavior, because I haven't quite, everything that I've heard is I've either read or I've heard other rumors. Frankly, the question isn't necessarily, her politics at this moment or her or whether this is disqualifying to be president, but to characterize the criticism based on this is fascinating, and to use the argument that this is in some way gendered, to not take it seriously, is the most gendered perspective you could take on this. Because if these accusations were that a man was throwing things at their staff, or if the accusations were that when a man was confronted with anything, that he fell apart and started yelling at everybody, which is the other part, is that like, look, this is a high pressure job. This would be immediately disqualifying. And it's fascinating how, and look, if you are in the news business and you were not aware that these things were going to come out when she declared, you are you must work very hard at not talking to other news people because I heard about this. And if I'm hearing about it, it seems to me that everyone should have. But here is that this line of arguing, and it frankly, like, it makes me even more skeptical about Klobuchar to hear her surrogates saying this stuff. Listen to this. Who is this guy? I don't even know who some Republican strategist. All right, let's listen to, and Christine Quinn, who might as well be a Republican strategist, as far as I'm concerned, on with Stephanie Ruhle.
Minimizes and deflects from the misconduct of others, and I think it's wrong.
Can I say, as it relates to Amy, I am so sick and tired of almost every time a woman steps forward to move up in position, whether it's political or in business or anywhere, she is all of a sudden the meanest, cruelest manager in the world. I'm sure Donald Trump is a peach to work for, because every time you turn around, he's told Twitter and the world you're about to get fired. Insert Hillary Clinton. Really good
but I've worked in the Senate. I've talked to many other people who've worked in the Senate, for men and women, and they say that they're good bosses. When you have to be taken over and taken aside by the majority leader for throwing a binder at a staffer and hitting them, that's a problem.
Did Harry Reid confirm that he pulled her aside and had this conversation? I don't believe he did.
It's been confirmed by sources and in the report.
Harry Reid has not confirmed.
And the whole reason these stories are coming out are because of ex-staffers of Amy Klobuchar saying it's a temperament issue.
Tell me examples.
And I would be saying this.
Show me example. Really? Show me an example.
Absolutely.
You would not.
I would absolutely. If a man threw a binder at a staffer, I absolutely would.
Every time, almost every time, a woman steps forward, all of a sudden there are these unnamed sources, and Harry Reid is not confirmed.
Basically saying she was.
First of all, there are. I don't know if anybody has been named, but it's not. I got news for you. Maybe Christine Quinn is just completely out of the loop, but me sitting here in this office in Brooklyn heard about that there were ex-staffers, a lot of them.
And also the union letter that came out, that's also a named document of the guy going back years ago saying we can't endorse her as a labor union purely based on her staff conduct. That was actually one of the meat of the first piece.
And isn't it documented that she has the highest staff turnover in these?
And also the new one coming out is...
Maybe it was a binder full of women and she was just getting really excited about diversity.
But here's the problem. Like, I think there is, in a, not in this context, but broadly speaking, what Christine Quinn is talking about is a legitimate phenomena that is highly, highly problematic and certainly implicated in, I think there's no doubt in my mind that it was implicated in the Clinton race and that it's an issue for all of the women who are running for president. But to use this example, to talk about that issue in the context of this example does everybody a huge disservice.
Well, it's breathtakingly cynical. And also, I have to say, like, I know people who were in the Clinton orbit, and I, certainly on public record and private gossip, I never heard anything about Hillary Clinton being in anything other than good to work for, ever. That was never in orbit.
And just the way that Christine Quinn is characterizing the attacks, it's not like she's like the reports are that Klobuchar is abusive.
Well, and the new report, I don't know if you caught this before we went on, but that she called other people to have them rescind offers from departing staff. Obviously, if a man did that, I would say it was strategic and go-getter.
Right.
But because she's a woman and I'm a brocialist, I'm going to object to that.
Hey, she's just trying to get by in a man's world, all right? Just like when Cersei Lannister blew up all those people in Game of Thrones.
That was actually legit.
I mean, is that just what that's sort of...
Yeah, that's an unfair comparison. I watched that part of the show. It seemed like she had a valid point
The
there.
men who just like being like that, like just horrible bosses and abuse their staff, like Christine Quinn just wishes she could get away with it, maybe.
Yeah. So, I mean, my only takeaway from this clip is, other than how horrific this argument is, I'm very curious to hear about Christine Quinn's staffing.
And all of the people defending her along those lines.
All right. Meanwhile, we should probably turn on the IMs. I don't have too much time here.
And again, if she came out saying, I just want to underline this, if she came out and said, you know, I've learned and I've improved and I've done training and now look at my experience with my staff now, and that's something I want to take accountability for, I wouldn't make an issue of this.
But my sense is that we wouldn't know about it if she had done any of those things.
You know what? That's the even deeper point, because I think you're totally right that the staff was basically sending these signals like, we want you to be in the Senate and do your job. We don't want to cause in a whole bunch of unnecessary drama. But if you run for president, we're going to need to let you know that you're an unrepentant abuser. But if she had either that, or again, what if she said several years ago, I think I want to run for president, and I realize that this is super fucked up, and I'm going to become a better person. Like, I think it's great in general, the idea that people can grow and improve. I hate the I'm opposed to this sort of like discard perfectionistic approach to everything completely. So I just want to keep emphasizing that my main beef right now, I mean, the stories are horrible, but it's the fact that she's come out and actually said, I expect a lot from my staff, just like I expect from the country, is what tips me to
I'm also
and that's how I'm going to treat all of you if I'm president.
Yeah.
I am very skeptical of claims of certain people are hard to work for, because generally what that does, at least in the context of like show business and whatnot, is that they're highly demanding. But when you start to get physically abusive, when you start to prevent people from having careers because they want to get away from you, that's highly problematic. Calling from a 856 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. Can you hear me?
I can. Who's this?
Great. This is Space Ghost from the TMBS Left is Best Digitosphere.
Oh, hello, Space Ghost.
So since I'm calling in, I thought maybe I would deliver the official Discord rebuttal to your interview. So I hope there won't be any upstaging later.
Okay. Well, I mean, are you are you authorized to deliver the official one?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay.
No. Like this is just me. But since the Discord was calling for the terror to be waged against John Tepper, I actually think I'm going to be a little bit nicer.
Okay.
Are you going to make excuses for the terror? Important question.
No, there will be no excuses for the terror. Obviously, I haven't read his book, so I'm just going off of what he's said in your interview. And this is really more about this whole, the corner of antitrust advocates that is evangelizing for competition. And I say evangelizing because it always seems like their solution to every problem with the market is to just let the competition kick in. And I don't think this is based on any kind of objective, economic analysis of what would actually make it work, and is simply an ideological hang-up about preserving market structures no matter what. And is also, probably going off of neoclassical economic models around an ideal of perfect competition that is kind of bullshit and relies on, constructing an actual, fantastical utopia that can't possibly exist.
Well, wait a second. I don't know about your first point. About your second point, I don't think that's the case at all. I think they're calling for robust government intervention in these markets, and it's not a utopian. Like I say, we have seen this in the past. We haven't seen it in 25, 30 years, but the U.S. government broke up the telephone company. There was a telephone company. And
how many companies was AT&T broken up into?
I think it was 5 different regional ones, and then all the long distance broke up.
Okay, so I'm just trying to compare that to the carriers that exist now, which are still fairly, I mean, it is still now.
But what has happened over the past 20 years, right? We have seen reconsolidation. And so
right, and that is a natural tendency of most industries.
Well, yes, particularly if you do not have a regulatory structure about it. I mean, if the regulators step down and they are told that you no longer assess the antitrust based on these principles, but rather those principles, then that's what happens. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that it can never work in any kind of sense.
Well, when you say it's utopian, it's utopian, you are.
Well, no, I'm so. What
Don't
I really,
bully my
what
Discord.
I was, really trying to get at was that, like, they seem like there are plenty of cases where there are natural monopolies, right? Where there are just like efficiencies of scale that make it economical to concentrate or operate as a monopoly. Like if you look at, the infrastructure items like urban mass transit systems, broadband, they tend to, like it tends to just make the most sense for those to operate monopolistically. And that is where the best policy response would be to make them public utilities. And I think that a lot of the things that the industries that he was talking about, like I was specifically thinking about tech platforms, because I'm really skeptical of the efficacy of breaking those companies up or breaking the platforms up as opposed to just making them public utilities. And I think there is a way to do it.
How would you make YouTube a public utility?
You could, the platform itself, you could set it up as a kind of independent public trust. So you don't have this heavy hand of government weighing in on content.
Well, wait a second. But if it's if the government has set it up, that there is no way that you're not going to have First Amendment issues, right? And then
that's.
And then what do you now? And then what are you going to do in terms of advertising?
Of advertising on YouTube, on videos?
Yeah. The government is going to sell ads, is going to have a sales force.
The BBC does that. The BBC does take private advertising now. Also, when you say First Amendment issues, what's the trouble with First Amendment? I don't know.
So everything's allowed.
Yes, definitely. That's the strongest argument for, not that I care per se, but the ultimate ironic answer to all of these alt-right assholes is you better support a massive social intervention in the economy if you want your First Amendment
Well, I know
rights.
that's pretty ironic, but we're not just talking about politics.
Obviously
when
things
you
that
have
are
kids,
criminal wouldn't be allowed.
Yeah. Well, what? Wait, what do you mean criminal?
Well, you can't, things that don't fall, like you can't post a video of killing somebody under the First Amendment. You know that. We already know that.
We do?
Wait, you think it would be legal
snuff films?
To post? Snuff films are not legal. They're not covered under the First Amendment.
They're not?
Are you joking with me?
Well, I think some things are considered obscene.
Several decisions.
No. Literally, an actual snuff film is, of course,
well,
not
you can't
covered
kill somebody.
Right, you can't. That's an illegal activity.
I think you're opening up a huge can of worms with a YouTube situation where you're going to be selling ads, and the British do not have a First Amendment. So to the extent that they take ads and this and that, it's not problematic. The complications involved in that, I think, would be enormously problematic. I think it's fairly easy to break up Google into multiple different parts. And again, you don't need legislation to do it. And it's definitionally not utopian because we've done it in the past.
Okay. I got to defend utopianism a little bit here.
Well, wait a second.
You say that like it's necessarily a bad thing and necessarily impossible, whereas
the caller did.
No. Like the only point I was trying to make before is that, like, yes, communism is utopian. It's a thing that I believe in. Maybe it's not possible. Maybe it is. But like this kind of the ability to like harmoniously regulate capitalism so that everybody gets what they need is also utopian. That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah, I think you just mean utopian
Like, it
by
doesn't mean
really
it's
hard to
impossible.
pull off in today's politics, which I think all of the things we talk about.
Well, everything is utopian in that definition, but
I
the
think isn't that
definition
the
of
way you're using it,
utopian
caller, though?
is completely idealistic
I
and perfect.
understand, but
and
caller,
we have had.
I understand, but caller, you're using it in the way to just mean really hard to pull off, right?
Well, you can't say
replacing the whole system is really hard to pull off too.
You can't say.
I'm not-
Hold on.
Wait.
You can't say.
Well, you can't-
You simply cannot say that. Yeah, Jesus Christ. You cannot say that antitrust is utopian, but total revolution of our capitalist system is not.
No, they both are.
No, they're both not, because we've actually had a rigorous antitrust regime, and we don't need legislation to return to it. Now, you can argue that it's not sufficient, or you can argue that it is, it's not. I don't know how you would argue it's not practical, but you can argue it's not sufficient. But you can't say it's utopian. It's
Okay,
not.
do not use the word utopian, sir. You will, and also Sam already sweating bullets. Apparently, Ronald Reagan just said to me, Sam looking visibly uneasy that snuff films might be illegal.
That's a problem.
Well, let me just can I just say I didn't mean to say that antitrust policy is utopian. Like, I was talking specifically about the neoclassical school of economics and the models that they produce, that a lot of people around antitrust, rely on, I think, to a detriment. I also didn't call in to make you angry, Sam, so I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
He gets very nitpicky about words, so weigh your words carefully.
Words matter.
I don't support
Yeah,
Steve
and
Schmidt
the
the way
thing is,
Sam.
like-
I think words
Let
somewhat don't
Space
matter.
Ghost finish.
Go. Oh! All of a sudden, you're nice to Space Ghost.
Like-
I'm not being mean to Space Ghost.
I want to be, I do want to be pragmatic, and I think that, when you factor in just politics and just policy analysis, there are different optimal policies. Like, I think you would all probably agree that having a single payer healthcare system is far superior to trying to make an optimal market structure for health insurance, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the idea is that the single payer is an optimal market structure. I mean, I think, like, we're not going to be able to, it's going to be basically, we're going to be paying for insurance into markets, right? Into localized markets for medical care. We're going to be paying into, we're going to be a single payer paying into markets for drugs. And so, we're not eliminating the market. We're simply putting a substantial buyer in there who matches their, we're creating a monopsony so that we can essentially force the sellers into more favorable terms for us as individuals.
Right. And of course, you could go farther and have an NHS-style system and have, the government producing pharmaceuticals the way Elizabeth Warren has proposed as an option. Right. And so, like, the point is that, like, I think people like Tepper are of a mind to try to, like, make a market work when the easier and better option is often just to have a kind of public service. I was also thinking about, maybe, YouTube is a complicated issue, but, like, Facebook and Twitter, you can break up those companies, you can restructure them, you could, democratize the companies so there's more worker control, but still, like, the problem remains that you have to have a viable business model, and I don't see a profitable business model for these platforms to keep them, free at point of use that doesn't involve extracting data and content and, selling them off.
I mean,
so that to me would, that to me points to having them operate as a nonprofit kind of utility.
The Wikipedia model, maybe?
The optimal policy solution.
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn was
possibly.
talking about creating a national social network, right?
Yeah.
And they
as
have
the exclusive one.
Right.
No, like a public option.
As a public
Right,
option.
right, right.
Well,
and that doesn't contradict
public internet in
public
France.
option also does not is doing the exact same thing that I've been talking about. You're introducing a simply a lower cost version into the market, right?
As opposed to trying to make a completely private market work.
Right. Well, look, I'm not for a completely private market. But the idea that and there's nothing mutually exclusive about antitrust. In fact, I would argue that the quickest way to get to any type of government control over any industry is to start with a vigorous antitrust,
I think they're totally
so that you
synchronized,
don't
yes.
have the consolidation of political and economic power that is so problematic right now. I don't know if after the implementation of a robust antitrust structure that we are going to get to some type of, nirvana. But I do know that if we want to continue down a road of democratizing our economy and democratizing our society, that all the roads lead through inhibiting the power of these entities. And this is the way that on day one, anybody who gets into office can do that, right? I mean, so
we should do it.
I'm not saying not to do it.
Yeah, no,
I'm
I
saying
completely agree. I advocate for as robust antitrust policy as possible, along with further pushes to try and democratize and decommodify. And I'm not attacking your position, because I think I agree with your position. I'm talking about Tepper and others who are of the mind of trying to make a perfectly competitive private market every time, when they really ought to just risk the imagination of a new type of possibility that would be to push our society to a more democratic.
But this is what is so short-sighted in my estimation about that type of thinking. It's like, I'm going to get you. I'm going to take you, you're sitting by the side of a highway and you're trying to travel 100 miles. And somebody comes by and says, I'm going to take you 40 miles down the road. In fact, I'm going to take you 40 miles down the road. And that's the hardest 40 miles of the terrain. And, or it's at the very least as close to the hardest part of it as possible. And before you get in the car, you're like, you know what? 40 miles is not good enough. I'm going to stay right here. I think it's one thing to say it's insufficient, but you got to say it's necessary because it is.
I always say that it's necessary. And then I say that it's insufficient.
I'm talking to Space Ghost when he called in terms of his criticism of that.
It's been a very upsetting show because you used the word utopian, and now apparently snuff films are illegal. And I'm very concerned about that.
But the point is that the response, there's no doubt, and that's why I started the interview specifically with Tepper, saying from a political standpoint, I don't think from an ideological standpoint, there's a lot of people listening to this show where I think, your politics are going to be more limited in terms of their scope. But there is no way to get to a place where you can wrest anything away from private, private ownership without diminishing the enormous amount of consolidation that has taken place. There's just no way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I really think that we're talking past each other a little bit. So, I'll
That's because
I'll
you
wrap
outlawed snuff films and you said that it was utopian.
Where's my raincoat?
I said
Space
utopian
Ghost.
snuff films.
You can afford to do that because you're a space ghost.
That's right. I exist in a plane beyond time and space.
Well, I appreciate the call.
Yeah. So no.
Does this
I'll
mean
just
I
wrap
have
up
to
there.
put my
But if
raincoat away? Is that illegal too? Oh no!
All right. Now I get a jump.
I want to
appreciate the call.
Square
Space
the
Ghost.
circle a little bit, if I can, because I feel like we are often talking past each other in these discussions. So if you want to look at neoliberal policy, one issue that I have with it, I mean, the main issue, right, is that the government is doing more and more work to try to prop up this market and make it work. And like when I compared it to a Hugh Hefner Viagra boner the other day, I meant like it's fake. It exists because of the actions of the state. And as time has progressed and capitalism has developed into this new phase, it's taken more and more Viagra to get the same amount of boner growth, which the boner needs in order to stay alive.
I don't know what this means. What do you mean the government has done more and more to prop up the market?
I mean, that's what neoliberalism is in part, right? The government supports the market and makes laws in order to make the market function the way it's supposed to. And I see a lot of people bending over backwards to try to make this mode of production work.
My understanding is that that pure neoliberalism is a notion that the market can solve all problems, and that to the extent that government intervention is called for by the most, sort of the cynical, the classical neoliberals, is to establish the dominance of specific players within the market.
Well,
I think that's an ideology that props up neoliberalism, but that's not like the root
I think
of
part
it.
of what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, I think is right, which is that what we're doing in neoliberalism, unfortunately, we got to find a new word, is is finding new commons to privatize in a shrinking market space. But that's a very different move than dealing with monopolies. So monopolies is a reform. You can say
a public option is also government intervention.
So I actually, again, take it as a positive signal that people who want to save, quote unquote, capitalism are thinking in those terms versus thinking about new bioprospecting, projects in Latin America or Africa, or ways of like privatizing school security as an example, which is still obviously happening too. But I think that's the attack on neoliberalism, not anti-monopoly efforts. Anti-monopoly efforts are good reforms.
I mean, I was just trying to make a somewhat specific example of what I am talking about, because I am often accused of not being specific enough. But just like the very idea that people would be bending over backwards to try to figure out a way to preserve a system that has gone wildly off the rails and probably cannot be fixed. Like the burden of proof is always on the ones who don't want to do that. Like nobody ever has to justify why they want to keep capitalism despite all of the problems that it causes.
I mean, the name of the book is The Myth of Capitalism. It's a critique of capitalism. I mean, there's a certain amount of shadow boxing that's going on here. That is like,
yeah. I mean, on that note, like I agree. I don't trust like the Niskanen-centered style like libertarians and they talk a lot of good game on antitrust stuff, but I don't trust them at all. I would use them and use their political, like whatever they have.
Right, we're talking about an idea at this point.
But once exactly. Like
not
I think
that I'm going to vote for Jonathan Tepper to be president or to be in charge of the
Where's
reform.
my Tepper side?
You're not going to get like redistributionary or decommodification policies from these people. But in terms of like what we really need to deal with, and like the actual companies that are running the world right now, I think they might be helpful.
Well, here's the other thing.
And it's a move against the order. It isn't. They're not coming out and saying, like, "Hey, you know what? Inequality is a real problem," or "Here's an app for it." They're going back to very honorable, important legal and policy history and saying, "You just got to break these companies up," which is an affirmative role of government. It has an important legacy. And again, it's just, yeah.
And there's also
no one's saying not to do that.
There's also a shared principle in the sense that they actually genuinely believe in redistribution. It is not as active, but when you start with the notion that the problem is that returns on capital is too high, and that is what that essentially means is that labor is not getting enough money. That's what that means. And so that's the first premise. Then the question becomes that, which is dramatically different, I think, in terms of, particularly in the context of our society today, of what the agenda is for the vast majority of so-called capitalists. And certainly, from a libertarian perspective, this is not a free market ideology that is promoting this. It is an idea that says that if the market does it, it must be right. It is saying that these markets are not working in the way, and they are not mutually exclusive, it seems to me, remedies up to a point. At one point, there is a conflict. Because at one point there is a concern against, I think, anti-monopolists that the state might become too prominent in certain areas,
or just different sets of questions. Like, again, I don't want to bring. I won't. I think it's relevant now, but it's like their ideas are really good, and in some ways, it's like an inappropriate critique to say they're not talking about democratizing the workplace or things like Mondragon, because that's not what he's talking about. But that said, in the grander scheme of things, there's probably an ideological difference there. I'm not interested in just breaking up companies. I would like to see how companies operate be different. And that's fine. That's just a different philosophical, political orientation. But his work is not implicated because he doesn't address that. That just means you're coming from different places.
Yeah. I have no issue with people who want to institute reforms, right? Like, I'm pro-reform. I think most people on the left are leftists of all kinds. The only issue I have is when people pretend that those reforms are going to be good enough to solve the enormous problems that we face, including, a planet that's going to be uninhabitable in 20 years if we keep the same mode of production and accumulation.
Yeah, I think to do any of those things, we're going to have to go through, antitrust is going to be the first thing that we're going to have to do if we're going to be effective at any of that, because you're just not going to be able to fight that type of consolidated power.
Sure.
I think that's true. So thank you, Jonathan Tepper.
Let's just play Donald Trump and get this over with. Folks, Donald Trump went down to El Paso to give a speech, and he was greeted by some American patriots who were willing to plant themselves into the ground and be the wall. When Donald Trump says be the wall, you had no idea, but he was being literal. And some proud Americans have decided that they are going to be the wall. And I don't know, let's put some soaring, inspirational music over this clip of Americans literally almost, there were like 200 of them lining up with their MAGA hats on the border to be the wall. And I think what we really needed is some cement footing so that they could actually stay there. I mean, that's the problem.
Get in on it.
You don't want the wall to be that fluid, but go ahead. I like how they're shuffling along so that they're all holding hands. Oh, there's the guy with the rifle and the ski mask. That's the America I'm hoping for.
Is that an actual cop?
That looks like an actual cop.
This is so inspiring.
People come together.
Oh, look at that! That's a Texas flag with some type of semi-automatic rifle on it. That's super cute.
Block the Mexicans, and then we'll all be as one.
There you go, folks. There's your moment of inspiration.
Wow.
And so Donald Trump went down to El Paso, and I don't know. We haven't heard from him in a rally in quite some time. But I think he's getting a little bit more nuts. And it's not, I don't know if he's actually any more crazy than he's been in the past, but he's certainly, it seems to me that his rhetoric is going a little bit further, and I have a feeling it's going to keep going in this direction. There's no reason to believe it won't. It's annoying to hear him, but I think it's important, too, that we have at least a sense of, just some sense of where it's going, because I think there was like 7,000, 8,000 people in that venue. And it's important to sort of hear what 8,000 of your fellow Americans are talking about. Oh, now wait, is this? Oh, this isn't the clip of what he was saying before that we were listening to earlier?
Is he saying, Red Rover, send some Mexicans
No, he
over.
was saying some pretty nuts stuff.
Oh, murder.
Murder.
I thought we had that. Wait, is that part of this montage? I thought. Anyways, it was real crazy, folks, and things are getting real bad. I wish I could give Sam some good news, like snuff films are actually legal.
Oh, what, he saw the music on the background? We Are the World?
Good
Of
work.
criminal aliens, including those charged or convicted of approximately 100,000 assaults, 40,000 larcenies, 30,000 sex crimes, 25,000 burglaries, 12,000 vehicle thefts, 11,000 robberies, 4,000 kidnappings, and 4,000 murders, killings, murders. We will. If we cut detention space, we are cutting loose dangerous criminals into our country. Slashing ICE detention is the first step of many for the far left. I call them the radical left. We will never abolish ICE. They want to abolish ICE. We're never going to abolish ICE.
So there he is. He's
might be
complaining
right.
about the cutting of the detention centers. It's not actually a reduction on the detention centers. It's just not letting them grow exponentially. We have a net zero, basically, of immigrants entering the country at the border, which these detention centers hold. So there's no reason for it. We heard from Ronald Reagan the other day, yesterday I guess it was, that they fill the seats. That's what their agenda is. They don't care if there's 10,000 beds or 40,000 beds. The policy is to fill the seats. So there is no rational assessment as to whether someone is a threat. There is no rational assessment as to whether this person should be allowed to wait in within the population for their trial. There's no rational barometer at all. It is simply, if we got the beds, we fill them. That's the policy.
Well, on the bright side, like having Trump get up and say we're never going to abolish ICE, like hopefully, I think, is helping to get more liberals on board with the idea of what used to be like a fringe leftist issue, right?
Yeah, the more that becomes a Trump talking point, I think the better it is for those who want to get rid of ICE. Here is a moment where apparently one of the MAGA heads had an issue with a reporter from the BBC, obviously a non-American maybe, or at least a non-American outfit.
Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans have reached the lowest level in the history of our country.
What?
Unemployment?
Oh, unemployment.
Or just like the number.
He flashed the three.
Oh, the white power sign?
Yeah.
And he was the one who assaulted the BBC guy? Were they cheering "Let him go"?
Probably.
I can't understand what they're saying.
Oh,
there
yeah,
it
there
is.
it is. Let's see what they're cheering.
It kind of does sound like "Let him go."
Sounds like they're saying
Wow.
Probably.
Ooh, that's sort of gross. Just sort of gross.
I thought that sign meant okay. Why would he?
I'm okay. They've grabbed me, but I'm okay.
I'm fine. He's not. He's not American.
All right. We don't have any time here because I got to go. Oh, I'm sorry, folks. We have run out of time. Apologies. I have 27 callers on the phone. We're going to have to just do a call-in show. Maybe we should just do that Friday before we go on vacation.
In a certain sense.
All right. Let me take 10 IMs, then we're out of here. Ben Katz. Hey, guys. Big fan of the show. I want to share the story about the danger of Google apropos your conversation today. I work at security, a warehouse facility where I work for 10-hour shifts a week, staring at closed-circuit TV monitors. It's exceedingly boring. All of this is a long way of saying I spent a lot of my day surfing the internet. Anyway, because I exclusively use Google to search the web and because just 10% of users click past the first page of search results, I was completely unaware a very successful cam girl site was being... okay.
I had a good feeling about that one. That was that.
The DX Fool. Hi, folks,
and
and happy no, it wasn't even that funny. Hi, happy Oriental New Year. I can't wait to hear the Desi Kamala Indira Harris character.
Yes.
The other day, I had the distinct misfortune to tune in to the Michael Medved's replacement on Salem Radio Network, the home of Dennis Prager and Hugh Hewitt, America First, with Sebastian Gorka. And I found the website you can download promos. And there are audio clips on YouTube, such as with Charlie Kirk. Meanwhile, Breitbart News has found an opinion piece by future Representative Rashid Tlaib from 2006 in the Nation of Islam newspaper. What the heck? That's weird. Yeah, no, I don't want to click on any of that. A Square, Mike, you're so on point with Klobuchar, but sorry, sorry, girl, but bye. MR, where is John from San Antonio? Need to know if he's concerned about Bernie not jumping in the race. Surely Sam Tepper not far enough, but since we can only go for incrementalism now, implementing some of this TDR-type capitalist suggestion solutions would be a big win. We need a hearing in Congress with Tepper, Lozanic, and Piketty to start the reorientation. Jamie, sadly, the center-right has been squatting in the Democratic Party for a while now.
True.
Contagious Chameleon. Couldn't we just include a blank check in the Medicare for All bill that would allow cities and counties to municipalize the hospitals within their limits? I mean, I guess theoretically, I love Sarah Palin. I want to defend Ralph Northam using 2 points. First, we all made mistakes when we were young. We need to grow. When Malcolm X was young, he fried his hair, drank the devil's Kool-Aid, and chased white women. But he corrected his shortcomings and helped others do the same. Next, I want to defend Ralph Northam by being completely ignorant of the history of blackface. Northam said he did blackface because he wanted to emulate his hero, Michael Jackson, which they said made him a racist. But not one reporter called Michael Jackson a racist for doing whiteface.
Lol.
Mac from Maryland, didn't reports come out of Bolton throwing staplers at staffers? Yes. In fact, that's what kept him from being...
George Voinovich, was that who it was? There was a Republican senator from Ohio. I remember watching the hearings, and he blocked him on committee, and he actually, he just basically was like, I can't get over your staff treatment. That was basically why he blocked him.
Senator Pug, Elizabeth Warren coming to L.A. for some sort of rally organizing event that I'm going to. If there's a chance to ask questions, what would be the best to ask her about and make sure there's no wiggle room, i.e. Medicare for All, not siding with capitalism, taxing the rich at higher rates? Well, I mean, she's announced that she's a capitalist. So I don't think she's going to say she's not going to side with capitalism for whatever that means. But as much as I love her when she goes after bankers, I would really hope to pin her down on some things. You can ask her, how big of a role would you anticipate for private insurers and Medicare if you're Medicare for all? Winnipeg Craig, Sam on Klobuchar. Look, I don't think someone should be driven out of public life because they beat Brendan for drinking the last liquid IV. Help us, Mindy. An FYI for Mindy. I know you're not a fan of Bernie, but would you vote for him in the general if he won?
Sure,
Oh,
Mindy
I'm sure
would.
she
Of course
would.
Come on, give Mindy her proper due. Mindy knows we need to get rid of this guy, and I don't think Mindy doesn't strike me as a Bernie hater, actually.
JJ Cool. Hey Sam, do you know if Michael washes his hands? I don't know.
Oh, what joke?
This is a reference to a Fox News guy, Doof, said he hasn't washed his hands in 10 years. He was a guy that Trump was going to put in charge of the VA.
No, I probably wash my hands too much.
Final I am of the day, the Chris Lapaco. A lot of people have been talking about how you abuse your staff. You better address that before you run against Chuck Schumer. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there.